Good morning, members. Guide, we beseech thee, Almighty God, that we, members of the Senate, may wisely deliberate for the good of this country and for the glory of thy holy name. Members, join with me in saying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from all evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Pray be seated, honorable members. Good morning, honorable members. This session of the Senate now commences. Honorable members, the principal focus of this session of the Senate would be consideration of the appropriation bill, its introduction through a resolution to that effect, and as is normal, the leader of government's business would be the one introducing that motion. The standing orders allow for 1 hour and a half for the leader of government's business to present the motion, what is normally referred to as the budget. Thereafter, the leader of the opposition, although there is no opposition strictly speaking, but there is in the sense that the Governor General exercised his discretion and appointed someone to that office. That individual, from the time I took the chair, has been Senator Burke. I have received no information that there is any other. So we would anticipate that Senator Burke will then respond, and he too has an hour and one half. At the discretion of the chair, every senator can be given 15 minutes more. My practice has been to automatically give that 15 minutes to every senator, so that in effect, the leader of government's business, the one who presents the motion, and the one who responds to the motion will have an hour and 45 minutes. So that's automatic. I give everybody the additional 15 minutes simply because I believe this is one of the most important motions that this House will debate, as the nation's finances and the management of the economy significantly depends on it. So, senators, please take note. Then the debate will move alternately from one side to the next. Leader of government's business first presents. The leader of the opposition, as it were, Senator Burke will then respond, and then we move alternatively accordingly. Honorable members, I do have noticed that two members will be late this morning, and there are Senators Bernardine and Senator the Honorable George Vincent will be late, and Senator Diali has informed me that he has some urgent pressing business which require him to vacate the House briefly, but he will return. Once again, honorable members, a most warm good morning to all of you, and we look forward to a very spirited, lively, and intellectual debate, of course in the spirit of this Christian season. So once again, good morning to all of you.
Item 3, oath of allegiance or formation of a new senator. Item 4, confirmation of minutes.
Senator Steele.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes of the proceedings of the ceremonial state opening of the 6th session of the 9th Parliament held at the Grenada Trade Centre on Friday the 20th of October 2017 be taken as read.
Honourable members, the question is that the minutes of the proceedings of the ceremonial state opening of the 6th session of the 9th Parliament held at the Grenada Trade Centre on Friday 20th October 2017 be taken as read. All those who have that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary opinion say nay. I think the ayes have it. The ayes do have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move for the confirmation of the minutes of the proceedings of the ceremonial state opening of the 6th session of the 9th Parliament held at the Grenada Trade Centre on Friday the 20th of October 2017.
Honourable members, the question is that the said minutes be confirmed. Those who have that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary opinion say nay. I think the ayes have it. The ayes do in fact have it.
Item 5, messages from the Governor General. Item 6, announcements by Mr. President. Item 7, ministerial statements. Item 8, presentation of papers and reports from select committees.
Senator Steele.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the following papers be laid on the table. The Estimate of Revenue and Expenditure 2018, 2018 Budget Speech, Government of Grenada Reports. 1, the Budget Framework Paper 2018. 2, the Compliance Assessment Report 2016 to 2017. 3, Fiscal Risk Statement. 4, Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy 2018 to 2020. Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee FROC 2016 Annual Report.
Thank you, Senator Steele. Honourable members, the following papers and reports from select committees, namely Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure 2018, 2018 Budget Speech, Government of Grenada Reports, Budget Framework Paper 2018, Compliance Assessment Report 2016-2017, Fiscal Risk Statement, Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy 2018-2020, Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee FROC 2016 Annual Report is hereby ordered to be laid on the table.
Item 9, petitions. Item 10, government notices. Item 11, unofficial notices. Item 12, questions.
Senator Steve.
Yeah, Mr. President, I propose that we defer the questions and answers to the next sit-in. Our focus today and over the next couple of days must be on the budget debate. Move a motion that the questions, item 12, be postponed for the next sit-in.
Honourable members, the question is that item number 12 on the order paper be postponed to the next sitting of this Senate. Those in favour, say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say nay. I think the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. So item number 12 with the questions, and I think there are questions mainly in the name of Senator the Honourable Keith Clowden, will be forwarded to the next sitting of the Senate.
Item 13, personal explanation. Item 14, motions.
Senator, the Honorable Simon Steele.
Mr. President, I rise to move the following motion standing in my name, whereas the debate of the gracious address delivered by the Governor-General on the occasion of the ceremonial state opening of the 6th session of the 9th Parliament on Friday the 20th of October 2017 be deferred to a date to be announced. Be it resolved that the said address be now deferred, but I move that that be amended to read that the said address be further deferred to a date to be announced.
Honorable, sorry. Okay. Senator Steele, I don't think at this point an amendment to the motion could be entertained procedurally. So I think you need to speak on the motion, suggest that there should be a deferral, and we leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it's customary that for the presentation by the Governor-General that it was debated at that 6th session here in this very House, and it is customary for this motion to repeat itself on the order paper until such times as the debate that is about to take place with regard to the budget, which speaks to the throne speech, is concluded, and as a matter of course over the following sessions it will be removed off the order paper. So I propose that the debate on the throne speech be deferred to a date to be announced.
The question is the debate on the motion moved by the Leader of Government's Business in respect of the gracious address delivered by the Governor-General on occasion of the ceremonial state opening of the 6th session of the 9th Parliament on Friday, 20th October 2017, be further deferred. All those who have that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say nay. I think the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. So debate on that motion is deferred. Taken into consideration, of course, that the debate on the motion now in respect of the budget is essentially really doing the same thing. Yes. You have the floor.
Mr. President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is necessary to appropriate for the services of the State of Grenada for the year 2018 by means of an Appropriation Act, be it resolved that the estimates of expenditure for the fiscal year January 1st to December 31st, 2018 be approved. And Mr. President, as this is a money motion, I wish to signal that to this Honourable House that the motion has been endorsed with the Speaker's seal and that I have the necessary consent to proceed.
Proposed is that whereas it is necessary to appropriate for the services of the State of Grenada for the year 2018 by means of an Appropriation Act, be it resolved that the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the fiscal year January 1st to December 31st, 2018 be approved.
Mr. President, the theme the 2018 estimate for revenue and expenditure is safeguarding our gains and continuing our progress. This is the sixth budget presented by this new National Party administration since coming into office in February 2013. This budget therefore builds on those that have gone before, and the theme speaks to the significant progress we have made collectively as a nation in rebuilding and stabilizing our economy. The theme also acknowledges, Mr. President, the importance of protecting, of safeguarding these gains as we continue to push forward. Mr. President, before I continue, I wish to congratulate the Minister of Finance and his team for the considerable work and effort that went into the compilation of the 2018 budget. This budget has been prepared with significant thought, thoroughness, and delivered in a timely manner, what we've now come to expect from this new National Party administration. It has been delivered in compliance with and in accordance to the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2015, the Public Debt Management Act of 2015, and the Public Finance Management Act, also of 2015, bills all passed in this very House. These acts enshrine in law the best practices that ensure Grenada's fiscal management and performance are not only stabilized, but are sustained for the future. In December 2016, Grenada successfully completed its 3-year homegrown structural adjustment program, with the final review conducted in March of 2017. The main objectives of the program, supported by the IMF and other development partners, was to restore fiscal and debt sustainability and boost long-term growth through structural reforms. Mr. President, all the objectives set were achieved, and today Grenada is held up as one of the model countries in the region and internationally, applauded for its economic growth and job creation-centered fiscal management.
I think it important for me to just make known my own observations. We are about the nation's business. As I indicated before, and I'm speaking now to all senators, this is one of the more important sittings in this chamber. And I am deeply concerned that not a single member of the, again, quote-unquote opposition is sitting at this time. We have the workers' representative, we have the farmers' representative, we have the business representative, and not a single member. That I consider, notwithstanding the fact that I have received excuses from 2 of those persons who advised the clerk that they would be late. But I think it's an affront to Parliament for an occasion like this that not a single member appointed by the Governor General in the absence of a defined leader of the opposition is currently sitting, and we've begun this debate. Again, I want to appeal to members of this House to show the level of respect that this House requires and is due. We are here representing the business of the people. A budget debate is no lean issue. It's a very serious issue because it affects the lives of every citizen of this state. And for this debate to commence without a single member of the, in quotation marks, opposition, to me, is an affront to the Parliament. And I just wish to make this known because it disturbs me. Continue, Senator.
Well, forgive me for commenting, but I hope that for the closing session that we have, unlike previous Senate sittings, when the opposition walk out before the end of the sitting, I hope they do arrive and they are here to the very end. So I'll continue, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to quote some of the IMF statements that have been made with regard to our performance over this 3-year period. The mission team has assessed that the government met all the performance criteria and structural benchmarks. The key program goals of restoring fiscal sustainability, strengthening the financial sector, and setting the stage for durable growth have been achieved, end quote. Another quote. Overall performance during the past, this last year of the ECF-supported homegrown program has been strong, Mr. President. The government and the people of Grenada should be commended for their achievements during the homegrown program, particularly with respect to debt reduction, growth, and the strengthened fiscal policy framework. Another quote, this success is due in no small part to the strong country ownership and high degree of consultation and collaboration with stakeholders, in particular the Committee of Social Partners and the Homegrown Monitoring Committee. Mr. President, these aren't our words. These are the words of the IMF, of those international development partners. Mr. President, in addition, Grenada received budgetary support of $286 million. That is to fund our fiscal programs, and debt relief of $372.3 million. That's a total benefit over the 3-year program of $658 million. $658 million. That was from our national shared sacrifice. This is significant, Mr. President. Mr. President, the success of the Homegrown Structural Adjustment Program and all that we have achieved has been achieved with the considerable support and sacrifice of our people. All our workers, the labor movement, the churches, the private sector, and civil society. It's down to that collective action that we were able to achieve what we have, Mr. President. There are those on the other side, and unfortunately they are all absent right now, who said that we would not succeed, that we would not get the support of our development partners. Mr. President, we did. That we would not get the support of the people. Mr. President, we did. And that we could not implement the program and achieve economic growth. Mr. President, we did. And that we could not create jobs. We would not grow the economy. We would not create jobs. In fact, Mr. President, they actually said we would send workers home, which we did not, Mr. President. Mr. President, let us not forget that the former administration abandoned their IMF program back in 2011. There is a cabinet conclusion that states that. They had every opportunity to do what was right, but they lacked the courage to do it. Instead, what did they do? They victimized and chased away investors. They shut down Parliament. They would do it again if I think they had the opportunity to. They ran the economy into the ground, and they were selling assets just to pay salaries. Mr. President, the measures that have been put in place to protect the gains and to build on the progress made go beyond just implementing these new laws. The Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee was launched in August of this year to provide fiscal oversight of government's fiscal finance, public finances. The work of this independent committee is important. It brings accountability to the process of managing public finances and allows for the ventilation by all parties of the associated facts and figures surrounding performance, thus helping to promote good fiscal governance, transparency, and accountability. And this is the first of its kind within the Caribbean, Mr. President. Additionally, the following critical areas are being actioned: embedding fiscal discipline, managing fiscal risk, modernizing our public sector systems, building economic resilience, and developing a strategic and results-oriented approach to long-term development and planning. So what does this all mean? Firstly, we must ensure our public finances are managed in a manner that is consistent with the stipulations of the fiscal responsibility law. We must stay within the law, Mr. President, balancing our expenditure with our revenue so we do not spend more than we earn. Secondly, borrowing on concessional terms only to keep our debt burden manageable with just considerable effort bringing down our debt stock, as well as minimizing the amount spent servicing debt and maximizing the available resources to fund capital projects, those projects that create jobs and so forth. Finally, this modern approach to fiscal management cannot be effectively implemented without updating public sector systems and processes. Mr. President, the days of ill thought through and flawed budgets are now a thing of the past. When budgets were presented to Parliament 5 months late, when budgets did not balance, budgets that had a $600 million financing gap, and when asked how that was going to be addressed, the former Minister of Finance, the only thing that he could say was, "Trust me, Mr. President, trust me." Mr. President, before I start my presentation with an overview of the 2017 highlights, including the major achievements for the year, I wish to remind the House of where we came from. Mr. President, this is to testify, Mr. President. There are those of us inside who would prefer us not to make comparisons to that period of 2018 to 2013. There are those who would wish us to forget about those dark and grave days. There are those who wish to deceive the nation, to rewrite history, to convince us that during their time in office, Grenada never had it so good, that was a golden age, that those were the best of times, and that where we are today are the worst of times, that today things have never been so bad. They wish us to forget that they had every opportunity to demonstrate to the nation just what they were capable of. But instead, they failed, and they failed miserably, Mr. President. That they think they can turn back time and they can recycle their past failures. They think that they can create a brighter future with those failed ideas. Mr. President, this is all mamagism. So we must compare. Mr. President, we must compare. We must compare so we can remember rather than to forget or to ignore. We must compare then and now so we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. Mr. President, the period 2018 to 2013, Grenada experienced the worst of times. 2008 to 2013. Record high unemployment, record high business closures, record high mortgage and loan foreclosures, business and investor confidence at an all-time low, an economy in free fall with years of negative growth, a government unable to pay salaries on time, a government selling assets just to pay salaries, a government unable to pay its bills with unpaid claims in excess of $110 million, sucking money out of the pockets of honest Grenadians. A government unable to manage its finances, spending more than it earned with record high deficits and record high debt. When 70 cents in every dollar that government earned went to pay salaries, pensions, and gratuities, leaving only 30 cents in every dollar to spend on our schools, our hospitals, our vulnerable, our infrastructure, Mr. President. Let us not forget that the weakest leadership, weakest and most ineffective leadership for a generation, where Grenada was a laughing stock of the regional and international communities. Mr. President, the Grenada of today tells a very, very different story. An economy that is stronger and more robust than ever before. A nation with restored hope and increased opportunities. Today, Grenada has emerged from being one of the worst performing nations within the region to the strongest performing in the region. Unemployment is significantly lower than when we came into office. Today, we have a government not only able to pay salaries on time, but public workers have received back pay, increments, pay increases, and one-off payments. a government that has fostered the highest levels of business and investor confidence in recent times, a government that has brought unpaid claims down to zero above 60 days, so we're putting money back in the pockets of Grenadians, and a government that is now living well within its means, moving from a primary deficit, so spending more than we were earning, to a surplus, earning more than we can spend. Mr. President, this is all testimony of the mountain that has been climbed. Mr. President, we aren't saying that the job is done. What we are saying is that we have come a significant way from where we were before. We are saying we're on a new path and moving in the right direction. We are saying that as a nation, we are far better off today than we were back then. Mr. President, we've positively touched many, but we also recognize there are still those who are yet to feel the benefits of this turnaround. Therefore, we need to continue to move forward, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd now like to move on to the global economic forecast. Mr. President, to provide the necessary context for Grenada's economic performance, it is important for us to understand the global and regional economic outlook. According to the latest World Economic Outlook report, global growth is estimated at 3.6% in 2017 and projected to increase to 3.7% in 2018. Mr. President, in 2017, growth in the economies of our main trading partners, the United States and the UK, is estimated at 2.2% and 1.7% respectively. In 2018, growth is projected to decelerate in the UK to 1.5%, a reflection of the challenges and the uncertainties associated with Brexit. In the US, a growth rate of 2.3% is projected, only a slight increase as economic and political uncertainties there also linger. Regionally, Mr. President, within the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, the provisional estimate is that the average growth would be restricted to 1.3% in 2017. That's here within the region. This contraction is as a result of the significant damage inflicted on Anguilla and Dominica by Hurricanes Irma and Maria earlier on this year. The average growth rate within the ECCU is projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2018 as a result of the subsequent hurricane rehabilitation efforts. Now let's bring it to Grenada. Mr. President, Grenada's economy has grown consistently since 2013 and is projected to experience its fifth consecutive year of growth in 2017. Growth of 4.5% in real terms is estimated for this year, the highest growth rate within the region, and higher than the 3.7% growth rate achieved in 2016, and far higher than the 1.7% here, 1.3%, within the region. This, Mr. President, is after years of negative growth under the former administration. Mr. President, we anticipate growth is conservatively projected at 3.3%. Mr. President, we anticipate the actual number to be higher than this. Every projection that has been made on previous growth figures has always underestimated the actual growth rate that we have achieved. We've always exceeded those projections. So Grenada's growth continues to be broad-based, with main economic contributors being tourism, education services, agriculture, fisheries, and construction. Moving on to tourism. Tourism for the period January to September 2017 saw a 6.9% increase in stayover arrivals from the corresponding period in 2016. This growth was led by a 13.5% increase in arrivals from the US market as a result of an additional 57 flights from the US during that period. Arrivals from other Caribbean countries increased by 7.6%, and this was despite the significant reduction in the number of flights from the main regional carrier. There was also an 11.9% increase in arrivals from Europe, however, a decline of 6.8% from the UK, a reaction to the Brexit decision and resulting weakening of the pound sterling. There are increased arrivals from the Canadian market of 7.5%. We're also seeing an increase in room stock with the construction and expansion of a number of hotels. We have seen an increase in the number of cruise ship arrivals, and with the exception of the main regional carrier, we have seen significant increases in airlift from our major markets. These growth figures, Mr. President, speak to increased economic activity and job creation. Jobs, Mr. President, jobs. Construction. Mr. President, the construction sector expanded in 2017 by an impressive 22.8%, exceeding 2016's growth rate of 13.1%. Mr. President, we know the construction sector is a barometer of what's happening within the economy at any given time. A significant upswing, as we are seeing in the construction sector, speaks to increased economic activity. It speaks to an improving investment climate, both domestic and foreign. It speaks to investment and economic activities in all of the productive sectors. It speaks to property development, homes for local Grenadians, homes for returning nationals, homes for foreigners. It speaks to more disposable income, enabling residents to renovate or expand one's existing home or business. It speaks to increasing commercial activity, the construction of new stores, retail outlets, shopping malls, offices, and other business places. It speaks to the expansion of the tourism plant with the construction of new hotels and the renovation of existing properties. It speaks to upgrades to our national infrastructure, our roads, our drains, our bridges, our coastal defences, retaining structures, etc. It speaks to the construction of new government buildings and of the upgrading of old. It speaks to the construction of new schools, new medical facilities. It speaks to jobs, Mr. President. It speaks to jobs. Mr. President, increased construction activity also positively impacts many other sectors, such as the transport sector, which is projected to expand by approximately 10.7% in 2017. The construction sector is projected to continue its positive growth in 2018, with several ongoing private sector developments and public sector investments, and I will run through these later on in my presentation. Agriculture and fisheries. With the exception of nutmeg and mace, which recorded growth, for the first 9 months of 2017, the agricultural sector contracted for the second consecutive year. Decreased production was recorded in all major crops over this period. Weather and pest-related challenges were the main contributing factors for this decreased production. Increased rainfall in the first half of the year negatively affected the flowering process of some crops, while also creating an ideal environment for the proliferation of certain pests and diseases. Fisheries. For the period January to September 2017, fish production exceeded that of the corresponding period last year, with £4.7 million landed, valued at $24.5 million, and fish exports of £181,000, valued at $10.74 million. I'll speak in more detail about agriculture and fisheries shortly. Private education. Accounting for 22.7% in 2017, private education continues to be the largest contributor to our GDP. Year-on-year increases in student enrollment at St. George's University, in addition to significant infrastructural investments on campus, underline strong growth in the sector of 5% in 2017. Real estate development. Mr. President, another barometer as to the relative health of the economy is the performance of the real estate market. It reflects investor confidence, both local and foreign. In terms of local Grenadians investing in properties, it also reflects the level of available disposable income. If there is low investment confidence and constraints on personal finances, The real estate market is flat or in decline, as we saw in that period prior to 2013. If confidence is high and personal finances are strong, the real estate market is buoyant, just as we are seeing today. A recent report on Grenada's real estate market revealed the following. Real estate activity in 2016 is on track to match the high level set in 2016. Sales through November 2017 totaled more than $100 million. That's $100 million being spent on real estate in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. Sales activity was dominant by Grenadians, Mr. President, by Grenadians purchasing, especially young families, making up more than 85% of the total transaction values, with average sales valued at $213,000. And that's both in terms of purchasing homes, purchasing land to build. Carriacou attracted the greatest number of non-Grenadians to its shores, with 25% of all foreign purchasers choosing Carriacou. Clearly, Carriacou is the place to be right now. Mr. President, all of this speaks to investor confidence and economic activity. Other sectors. Positive growth is estimated for the wholesale and retail sector and the transport sector, with marginal improvement expected in the communications sector. Additionally, the manufacturing sector is expected to expand by 11.3% in 2017, continuing from 4.6% growth in 2016. Preliminary estimates of production for the first 9 months show a 23.6% increase in beverages manufactured compared to the corresponding period last year. This is another demand-driven subsector reflective of the uplift in the economy. Job creation. Mr. President, all this economic growth and activity has also created many new jobs. Relative to 2016, preliminary results of the 2017 Labour Force Survey indicate that the employed labour force expanded by 1,095 persons, and the unemployed labour force declined by 2,822 individuals, resulting in a reduction in the unemployment rate from 28.2% in 2016 down to 24% now in 2017. What this means is that in real terms, the job market was not only able to absorb those new entrants to the job market, but in addition, able to absorb a percentage of those previously without work. It is important to point out that the methods and practices used to conduct the Labour Force Survey are based on and regulated by the International Labour Organization, the international body and standard used throughout the world to determine the official unemployment rates of countries. This isn't just us making up these numbers, Mr. President. Mr. President, when the New National Party left office in 2008, the unemployment rate was 24.9%. Back in 2008, 24.9%. During the period under the NDC of 2008 to 2013, the unemployment rate skyrocketed to over 40%. They met it at 24.9%. They left it in excess of 40%. Today, Mr. President, this new National Party administration has almost halved the unemployment rate, bringing it back down to 24%. Mr. President, there's a very clear message here. This is a clear illustration of which party is the party of economic growth and job creation and which is not. We must compare, Mr. President. We must continue with these comparisons. As significant, however, as this unemployment rate reduction is, from over 40% down to 24%, we still have a long way to go. But this administration will continue to do all it can to create opportunities for all to further reduce the rate of unemployment. We must get it lower still. Youth unemployment. Mr. President, there has also been a marked drop in the rate of youth unemployment. I'll say it again, a marked drop in the rate of youth unemployment. When the new National Party left office in 2018, youth unemployment was 36%, although high, very high. After 4.5 years in office, the NDC drove up youth unemployment to 53% in 2013, from 36% up to 53% in 2013. Today, under this new National Party administration, youth unemployment is now down to 39.2%. Still far, far too high, Mr. President. But once again, we are moving in the right direction. But we need to be clear as to which administration was responsible for driving up youth unemployment and which one is responsible for bringing it down. Comparisons, Mr. President, comparisons are important. We must continue to compare. Grenada's economic performance. Mr. President, I will now speak to government's fiscal performance for the current fiscal year. Grenada's fiscal position continues to improve and improve significantly. This is despite payments of over 17.9% to public officers in 2017, which includes a 3% increase in salaries, increments, one-off payments, and reductions in personal income tax. Mr. President, Grenada is projected to achieve a primary surplus of 4.7%, the third consecutive year a surplus has been achieved. This is a result of strong revenue performance due to increased economic activity, tighter tax collections, and administration's strict budget control, improved government spend, and waste reduction. Mr. President, by the end of 2017, the following results are expected relative to the 2017 approved budget. Current revenues of $678.6 million compared to a target of $657.2 million. We are overperforming here. Grants of $95.7 million compared to a target of $151.9 million. Mr. President, we are underperforming here due to lower than expected receipts from traditional donors and some challenges in terms of some implementation challenges. But Mr. President, the CBI's National Transformation Fund, or contributions from that fund, is 44% higher than was forecasted. Current expenditure of $590.8 million compared to a target of $599 million. We have overperformed here, spending within our means. Capital expenditure of $117.5 million compared to a target of $154.3 million. Mr. President, we have underperformed here, but we must keep this in perspective. This represents a capital program implementation rate of 76%. We achieved 76% of what we set out to, and that's compared to the former administration, which had an implementation rate of only 45%. The Customs and Excise Division collections are expected to reach $328.7 million compared to a target of $321.5 million, again over performance of $7.2 million. Inland Revenue Department is estimated to collect $326.7 million compared to a target of $309.4 million, an overperformance of $17.3 million. Citizenship by Investment Program. Mr. President, Grenada's CBI program has surpassed projections for 2017. There was a 50% increase in applications received in 2017, yielding receipts of $128.4 million at the end of October 2017. Based on the strong governance and due diligence processes that are in place, Grenada's CBI program is today regarded as one of the highest rated programs in the world. Mr. President, the IMF earlier this year praised this government for the strong legal framework instituted in the CBI program, declaring the program to be the gold standard among other regional programs for transparency. So applying this consistent approach of conservatism to the CBI program, The projected revenues for the program in 2018 is $81.1 million. Public debt and debt restructuring. Mr. President, public debt as a ratio of GDP has declined significantly since coming into office, moving from 108% in 2013 to a much more manageable 68.9% at the end of 2017. Debt to GDP ratio 108 down to 68.9%. This is not by accident, but as a result of the success of the homegrown program, the restructuring of our debt, and the positive growth within the economy. Today, Grenada's total debt stock reduction amounts to $372.3 million, or 12.4% of GDP. More comparisons, Mr. President. A debt to GDP ratio of 108 under the former administration, down to 68.9. Mr. President, the tremendous cost savings resulting from this reduction means that more resources are now available for investments in our nation's health, education, social services, and other critical public services. Estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2018. Mr. President, I'd now like to move on to the 2017 estimates of revenues and expenditure, which provide for total expenditures, including principal repayments on public debt of $1,112,039,938. The budget is summarized as follows. Recurrent revenue, $710.4 million. Recurrent expenditure, $607 million. Current account surplus, $103.4 million. Capital expenditure, $171.3 million. Primary surplus after grants, $147.8 million. Overall surplus after grants, $80.1 million. Principal repayments amortization, $333.7 million. The largest allocations by vote are public debt, amortization and interest, $401.5 million, which is 36.1% of total expenditure. The Ministry of Education and Human Resource Development, 112.1%, or 10.1% of total expenditure. The Ministry of Finance and Energy, $84.7 million, 7.6% of total expenditure. The Ministry of Health, Social Security and International Business, $82.3 million, 7.4% of the total expenditure. Ministry of Communication Works, Physical Development, Public Utilities, ICT, and Community Development, $61.2 million. Pensions and gratuities, $56.4 million. Police, $50.9 million. Ministry of Youth and Sport, $41.8 million, 3.8% of total expenditure. Ministry of Social Development and Housing, $39.7 million. The Ministry of Economic Development, Trade and Planning, $35.1 million. The Ministry of Tourism, Civil Aviation and Culture, $25.7 million. The Ministry of Agriculture, Lands, Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, 24.7%. Mr. President, additional budgetary support for the productive sectors of agriculture, tourism and manufacturing will be made available in 2018. The sum of $6 million will be available and allocated in accordance with the priorities identified with the Ministry of Agriculture, Tourism Authority and the Manufacturers Association for small farmers, small hoteliers and small manufacturers. If the fiscal space allows, the allocation will increase from $6 million to $10 million. Mr. President, I'd like to now spend some time running through in more detail the budget highlights of the following ministries. Firstly, the Ministry of Education and Human Resource Development. Then I'll go through the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands, Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. And then finally, I will touch on the Ministry of Economic Development, Trade and Planning. So the Ministry of Education, Mr. President. for the fiscal year 2018, the allocation for the Ministry of Education is $112,100,686. After debt servicing, the Ministry of Education Human Resource Development has the highest budgetary allocation, but of which $67 million is current expenditure for teachers' salaries. A high percentage of that is on supporting our teachers. Mr. President, I will focus my attention on 5 central areas within the ministry, and I'll run through some of the key activities and initiatives that are associated with each. The first is our teachers. The second is curriculum, what we teach our students. The third is on school infrastructure. The fourth is the management and administration of the education service. And the fifth is on student support services. So teachers, Mr. President. Mr. President, the importance of our teachers and the critical role that they play in our schools, in our community, in our societies can never be overstated. Therefore, ensuring that our teachers are able to fulfill their potential is absolutely key. And to this end, the training and support given to our teachers has been given top priority within the ministry. Mr. President, it's frightening. When we came into office in 2013, an assessment was done, and it highlighted that one third of primary school teachers were untrained. Now, secondary schools, 60% of our teachers in our secondary school system were untrained. In addition to that, we'd identified 605 temporary teachers within the service. These are teachers, some spent 10 years, some 15 years in the service, but not permanently appointed. And the need to address these two issues, the need to uplift, build capacity to train our teachers so that they can service our students better and they can provide a more professional service, and the need to regularize those 605 teachers, 650 was an absolute priority. Mr. President, since we came into office, from the period 2013 to 2017, 143 teachers have pursued full-time training at the associate degree level, which is the minimum requirement that is now required to provide a professional service. And the salary and costs associated during the period of time those teachers are studying has amounted to $7 million. That's effectively supplementary support that the government, that the ministry is providing during the period that these teachers are gaining these new skills. In addition to that, there's a release program, so those teachers who want to leave, whether it is to UWI, whether it's to St. George's University, are able to do so, get that training, and then return back to the school service. And in addition to that, many hundreds of teachers have benefited from specialist courses, many specialist courses, workshops, whether it's in early learning, whether it's leadership, professional development, phonics, literacy and numeracy, to uplift their capacity. And this is to ensure that all of our teachers are receiving the greatest support that they need so that they in turn can provide the best level of education to our children. So in addition to that, Mr. President, there has also been another, or about to be another, critical intervention, and this is through the CDB-funded Grenada Education Enhancement Project, or GEEP. The value of this GEEP project is $40 million, and it's one of the flagship projects within the Ministry of Education. So in addition, with GEEP, in addition to the infrastructural works, the expansion, the construction, rehabilitation of new schools, etc., there is significant financial resources, both grant funding and concessionary loans, that can be used for institutional strengthening and capacity building within the education service. And one of the critical areas that's been identified is strengthening school leadership in all of the studies done within the education system. Leadership, quality of leadership, strength of leadership within our schools is viewed as one of the critical areas. A weak leader, a weak principal will impact the performance of the school. A strong principal will positively impact the performance of that school. So the Ministry of Education is engaging in regional leadership leadership institutions such as the National College for Educational Leadership. This is an agency that falls under the Ministry of Education in Jamaica, which was set up back in 2011, has transformed the quality and the educational capacity of principals and deputy principals in Jamaica. They now have a mandate to go out into the rest of the region to offer this service, and we are in discussions with them about applying some of those leadership principles and practices to us here in Grenada. So a scoping mission to Grenada was conducted last month and a needs assessment carried out. Mr. President, if we are able to establish such a leadership program for our principals, our deputy principals, and our aspiring principals here in Grenada, it will have a transformational impact in a short space of time, Mr. President. And this is one of the areas, as I said, that is seen as a priority within the ministry. Under the GEEP program, so in terms of uplifting our teachers, 120 primary and secondary school principals and deputy principals will receive leadership training. Over 750 primary and secondary teachers and specialist teachers will receive training also. 59 primary, secondary, and special needs teachers will attain a bachelor's degree level qualification under this program. And then the tutors within the Teachers Training College at TAMCC will also receive support so that the level of teaching the trainers will be improved as much as possible. And this, Mr. President, will go a long way to bridging some of those gaps in the training levels, the skill levels of our teachers that we met when we came into office in 2013. Regularization of teachers, as I say, coming into office, 650 temporary teachers in the system. For years, 15 years, some more. It's not only demotivating for them, but this cloud of uncertainty where they cannot, well, one, they're not entitled to the same levels of training, support, and benefits as a permanent teacher, highly demoralizing. But their status, their unsecured status, means that they are unable to secure loans, bank loans, cars, whatever it may be, for a mortgage. So this financial and economic uncertainty that has hung over them. So the Ministry of Education, together with the Department for Public Administration and the unions, embarked on the process of regularizing as many of these teachers as possible. In the first tranche back in 2015, 205 teachers were regularized. That is of September 2015, and that was based on the number of permanent vacancies that existed within the service at that time. The process is an ongoing one. The second batch, 70 teachers, was completed in January of 2017, and the third batch, September of this year, of 70 again were regularized. And then in addition to that, the regularization of temporary teachers at J.W. Fletcher Catholic Secondary School, the regularization of 12 physical education teachers who have been in the system since 1996 in various capacities, but under that temporary status. And consideration is currently being given to teachers at Grenada Christian Academy. So to date, Mr. President, 364 temporary teachers have been regularized. This is significant. This is over half, Mr. President, have now been regularized. And as I said, this is an ongoing process. There are teachers who have been interviewed, who have been assessed, who qualify, but those vacancies, those permanent vacancies, are yet to materialize. So over the course of the beginning of next year, we will see the formal regularization of many more. And what's important to note, Mr. President, under the former administration, they had every opportunity to do what we have just done. They did not regularize not one teacher, Mr. President, not one. Teacher direct incentives, a total of $470,000 has been spent this year alone in incentive allowances for teachers. So these are those teachers who uplift themselves, gain master degrees and above, and in recognition of that, they receive an incentive and allowance. Responsibility allowances have also been restored for all principals, vice principals, and department heads. So that is in recognition of the additional responsibilities that those persons take on. Curriculum development. Mr. President, two major interventions with regard to the curriculum. One is the integration of ICT and the introduction of ICT in classrooms, and then the expansion of technical and vocational training in our primary and secondary schools. These are two areas, ICT, technology, technical and vocational training, which we see as the way forward in terms of equipping our children, not just for the demands of where we are today, but also for the future. Integration of ICT into the curriculum. The focus of the ministry is to create an enabling environment for the introduction of more technology-focused learning. And to this end, a number of many ICT-related programs have been initiated. There are those who think ICT in the classroom is simply giving everybody a tablet, a laptop. St. Vincent saw the errors of their ways. Trinidad did them when they rushed out, provided everybody with a laptop, provided everybody with a tablet, but then realized that without the correct training, without the correct environment, it was just a waste of resource and had to recall. So the first thing, there is a project called the Mesh Network. Internet access in many of our schools is very limited or unstable. So there is a program, $600,000 has been allocated to it in 2018 to upgrade and ensure that as many of our schools as possible have full broadband access, etc., to be able to access those technologies. Is just a start, $600,000, but it is just moving towards that, creating that enabling environment within our school plant. Technology integration. The ministry has trained 140 teachers. More training, Mr. President, more training. And Senator Lewis, in her presentation, will go into more detail as to some of the training activities that are taking place with our teachers. But 140 teachers have received training in terms of integrating ICT into the curriculum. It's no good swamping everybody with laptops, with tablets, and our teachers cannot teach. Our students cannot learn. The infrastructure is not there to support it. So, Mr. President, in 2018, more effort to ensure that more teachers are developing and delivering lessons with heavy emphasis on the use of ICT tools will be a main focus. And then the area of STEM, a very, very innovative program. So that's science, technology, engineering, and maths. A $450,000 project in the creation of a solar-powered ICT center, which is being built for advanced STEM education. This is a state-of-the-art facility and is the only one of its kind, but again, it will be spearheading this thrust to science and technology. There are a number of other projects which all speak to ICTs within the classroom. The Profuturo project, which is looking at ICT tools in underserved schools. There is a Girls in ICT program to try and encourage more females to embrace science and technology. And then technology for the blind, providing technologies there so that those who have impaired sight are able to have a rich educational experience. The second area, Mr. President, is emphasis on TVET and lifelong learning. TVET is viewed within the ministry, within the government, as a critical tool for equipping our young men and women with the technical skills that they need to meet the demands of our current economic needs and national development needs, but also for the future. So to date, for our primary school students, 14 centres have been strategically located within different parishes, both here in Grenada and in Carriacou and Petit Martinique, to afford as many students as possible for training in at least 2 TVET subjects. And those subjects that have been identified are home economics and woodwork. It's just a start of that integration process. In addition to upgrading and refurbishing TVET centres in some secondary schools, 5 schools have already received significant financial resources so that they are able to provide full TVET CVQ courses. That's MacDonald College in crop production, St Andrew's Anglican furniture making, St Mark's Secondary furniture making, St Rose Modern commercial food preparation, and Wester Hall commercial food preparation and construction. The plan, Mr. President, is to roll this out across all of our schools. Infrastructure, and I'm going to go through this very quickly again. Senator Lewis will go into more detail as to some of the work that is taking place in our schools up and down the country. Mr. President, never before since the reconstruction efforts after Hurricane Ivan, never before have we seen the level of financial resources that is going into the upliftment and the upgrading of our school plant over this last 4.5-year period. So far, Mr. President, $100 million has been mobilized for the upgrading, whether it's the construction of new schools, whether it is the upgrading of existing schools, repairs, new facilities, etc. And these are through the BNTF, the World Bank, OFID, the CDB, other CDB programs, plus other funding sources. And what we're seeing through this is the design and construction, as a set of new schools, and the upgrading and refurbishment of others. And I'm just going to quickly run through so we can hear some of the numbers. St. Joseph's Convent, St. George's, $6 million spent on works complete. Grenville Secondary, $5.6 million complete. St. Mark's Secondary, $5.4 million. Anglican High, $5 million. GBSS, $8 million. Woburn Methodist, $4.5 million. MacDonald College, $9 million. T.A. Marichaux College, $3.3 million. St. Mary's RC, $4.1 million. St. Patrick's Anglican, $4 million. Paracletes Government School, $1.4 million. Bonaire, $570,000. The list goes on, Mr. President. St. Teresa's in Vincennes, pre-primary, $800,000. Telescope, $640,000. Mirabeau, the TAMCC campus, $388,000. Significant sums in the region of $100 million being spent on our school infrastructure, but we still have a long way to go. We still have many schools that are still functioning in temporary accommodation post-Ivan. But Mr. President, under the CDB-funded GEEP program, what we will see and works to come, which will be starting in 2018, is a significant refurbishment. These are new science blocks, technology blocks, single multi-story wings at Bishop's College in Carriacou, St. Joseph's Convent in St. George's, St. Joseph's Convent Grenville, Presentation Brothers College, Grenada SDA, J.W. Fletcher, in addition to providing technical assistance, technical drawings for the construction of 3 new schools, St. Andrew's Anglican Primary, Grenada Christian Academy, and St. David's Roman Catholic Secondary. So now looking at management and administration, so how effectively we're managing the education service. There are many moving parts. I'll just quickly talk about one key program, which is the Education Management Information System, which is to digitize all the records, currently paper records of teachers, of students, so to digitize and have electronic records so that the efficiency and the effectiveness of the management of our teachers, whether it's their performance, qualifications, the performance of our students, is all at our fingertips. Currently, 45% of schools are now using the system. Further efforts are required to ensure that that number moves up to 100%. Student support services. This, Mr. President, is more than just school books. There has been a continued debate over the last 4.5 years of whether there is a school book program in place or not. There is a school book program. We met a program in place in 2013 with significant abuses, significant wastage, poor use of resources, and the need to tighten that up, and that is precisely what we have done. But with regard to school books for 2018, there has been a review process of the curriculum and the school books required to support that, and there is a budgetary allocation of $2 million next year for new school books. School feeding program. School support services more than school books. We saw under the previous administration, they cut their budgets to school feeding, transportation, etc. The school feeding program, $3.1 million is budgeted for 2018. Every day, Mr. President, we feed 10,000 children, day in, day out. 52 primary schools, 17 secondary schools, and 10 preschools are all involved in that school feeding program. And then we'll move on to other areas. Yes, child needs its school book. Yes, they need to have a nourishing meal, but also uniforms, Mr. President, uniforms, and those who can't afford transportation and other special needs, Mr. President. So the budget, or what was spent in this current year, was $2.3 million, and there will be allocations for next. So in terms of school support services, student support services that this administration provides, it's a comprehensive program which includes books, includes feeding, includes transportation, includes uniforms, includes other special needs. Now moving on to human resource development scholarships, my favorite subject. To date, Mr. President, since we came into office 2013 through to now, 930 scholarships. 930 scholarships have been awarded to young men and women here in Grenada. And that is an investment of $186 million. That's what this administration, either through its own resources, whether it is revenue foregoing, whether it's financial support, whether it is its relations with friendly governments to support this, whether it's our partner St. George's University and the relationship that we have there. And that compares, $186 million in this period compared to the previous period, 2008 to 2013, where only $73 million was spent on scholarships. Comparisons, Mr. President. And we'll continue to gain as many scholarships for our young men and women as possible. Mr. President, I'll just move on to TAMCC, the restructuring and the transformation of TAMCC. This is a very important project, and it comes in a number of forms. There are 4 key elements to it. The first is looking at the curriculum, what TAMCC currently teaches, and the teaching capacity, what is taught, how it's taught. And we have a strategic partnership with the Petner Foundation. So Dr. Nicholas Brathwaite is the founder of that foundation, is putting his own resources into this, together with McMaster University out of Canada. And we have a comprehensive program which is looking at the curriculum, looking at how we can improve and increase the relevance of that curriculum to meet the academic needs of our young men and women, but also answering this question, this split between academic attainment and technical and vocational training, and the role that TAMCC should have. So work is taking place there in terms of looking at, reviewing, and making recommendations as to how that curriculum can be strengthened, and then how the teaching capacity of the lecturing staff, the faculty there, can be strengthened. That's one element. The next element is with the Caribbean Development Bank. We secured funding of $500,000 just for technical assistance in the first instance, which again is to look specifically at the area of technical and vocational training, looking at, again, what the specific needs are, how we can roll this out more forcefully at a tertiary level, but also at a secondary school level, so that we can ensure that the skills that we're offering to our young men and women is truly relevant. In addition, there will be new designs, looking at the campus, looking at the infrastructure, and looking at the renewal of the infrastructure at all campus sites with resource mobilization. So looking at how to upgrade, uplift those facilities. And then the fourth area is to do with the management and the organizational structure. There are four key positions which are being sought right now, and those who are existing within the service have every opportunity to be part of this process. But looking at the positions of a president, 2 vice presidents, a director of attainment as the change agents for the renewal of the college. So, Mr. President, work continues there. The area of accreditation. Accreditation is of critical importance, ensuring that our educational institutions are able to meet the rigorous standards, not only nationally, regionally, but internationally. And as such, a secretariat was established this year, which will support the accreditation, the Grenada National Accreditation Board, with 2 very clear deliverables, which is the accreditation of St. George's University's School of Arts and Science and TAMCC. So our students graduating from TAMCC, from St. George's University, from their Arts and Sciences faculty, are able to, their qualification is viewed on par with that of any international agency, institution. The National Training Agency, so significant activities here. Record numbers of certificates have been issued, the largest number since its inception, since 2017, with 1,100 CVQs and NVQs awarded to date. Just over 3,000 CVQs, NVQs have been issued. Significant collaboration with MAREP. 604 young persons have been trained through the NTA. Collaboration with the Ministry of Youth. 478 to date this year have been trained through the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Social Development. Significant work, and the significant role that the NTA plays is being fulfilled. So, Mr. President, moving on to the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands, Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. Mr. President, let me start by addressing the issue of the budget allocation to the Ministry of Agriculture. The allocation for the central administration of the ministry is $24 million, and this seems to be causing a lot of controversy in some quarters. But I need to make this very clear, Mr. President, very, very clear, that this is only part of government's investment and government's financing of the agricultural sector. There are many other activities that directly support the agricultural sector that are implemented through other ministries, and we need to look at it as a collective rather than singly. So one of the key areas, so outside, everything I'm about to go through is outside of that $24 million. The first, farm irrigation, critical at this time. Under MAREP, a irrigation for our farmers project valued at $5.3 million. And this project will assist many farmers at a time where we're seeing significant challenges with climate change. We're seeing extended dry periods which have affected agricultural production. We saw that in 2016. We saw that in 2017 with a reduction in production due to these adverse conditions. So, Mr. President, this will help our farmers to build resilience within their farms. Farm feeder roads. There are 2 significant programs ongoing right now. The first, under MAREP, an $8.1 million project for the construction of 30 farm roads. And then under CCC, under the Ministry of Works, a project valued at $100 million over 3 years to provide a significant network of farm feeder roads. And we all know the importance of opening up our rural lands, our agricultural lands, to make it as easy as possible for our farmers to gain access and to work their lands and to bring their produce out. So these are two very, very important initiatives. And then with that, with the Merit project, government itself.
Deputy President, in the chair.
Mr. Deputy President, government has to co-finance these Merit activities, and that is to the sum of $5.4 million. So that's not included in the numbers that we have seen. And under that Merit project, one of the key deliverables is to touch the lives of 7,500 rural households. Youth in Agriculture program, so this is in the Ministry of Youth, a $6 million allocation addressing the needs of how do we get more young people into the agricultural sector. We know we have significant challenges with an aging farm labor force and the need to get more young people into the service. So this $6 million project is just to do that. Significant benefit. And that will also increase the productivity of the sector, getting more young people, get some more energy into the sector and put some of those unused lands to work. Climate smart agriculture under the BTF valued at $4 million. Again, climate smart, that speaks to, again, building resilience into our farm practices. This is very, very relevant right now. And Mr. Deputy President, as a farmer yourself, you'll know the benefit and the need to receive as much support as possible to deal with these challenging climatic conditions. And this program, Mr. Deputy President, is there to help facilitate that. So significant value. MNIB, the certification, HACCP certification of the pack house, including the installation of freezers, chillers, which will enable the pack house to do two things. One, the HACCP certification means that it meets international food standards, which means that the MNIB, through this pack house, is able to export our farmers' produce internationally. So this opens up the market internationally, regionally and internationally for our farmers. And then the investment in chillers, in freezers, means that the MNIB can purchase even more produce from its farmers, from our farmers, able to store it, store more, store in better conditions. So these gluts that we have, oversupply, prices come down, undersupply, prices go up, scarcities can be addressed through these improved conditions. And we've also seen the significant benefits that MNIB has extended to farmers with a 20% increase in prices that it is paying for produce from our farmers. So it's a significant benefit. So Mr. President, Deputy President, if we add these things up, if we assume that this CCC Farm Feeder Road project is $100 million over 3 years, but let us assume that they're only able to consume $10 million, execute $10 million worth. Take the Marrett Farm Feeder Road project, $8.1 million. The irrigation project, valuable project. You know about irrigation projects. $5.3 million. Government of Grenada co-financing, $5.4 million. Youth in agriculture, getting our young people into the sector, $6 million. Climate smart agriculture, building resilience to our farms. The M&I, that's $4 million. The pack house, increasing capacity to purchase and to export, $5.4 million. Mr. Deputy President, in addition to the single line item for the basic administration, we are looking at an additional $44 million to the agricultural sector, Mr. President. So significant support there. I think we got the times wrong. There should be another half an hour. 1 hour and 45. Is right? I'm right. Okay.
Senator Steve, the first bell will indicate to you that you have half an hour more, and the second bell will indicate 15 minutes more, and there won't be a third bell.
Good. So, Mr. President, just quickly running through some of the other highlights within the Ministry of Agriculture. GCNA, updating the ordinance. That is seen as a key initiative to bring greater efficiencies, to modernize practices, to modernize a performance management method that dates back to 1947. Legislation has been drafted in conjunction with the associations, the GCNA, the GCA, together with the ministry, and that legislation will be sought to come to this very House for debate. But what this legislation is seeking to do is to ensure that farmers have a greater stake in the sector, that there are practices and modalities that are able to attract more investment and more efficiency into the sector. So that will have significant benefits. Just running through plant propagation, Mr. Deputy President. There are continued challenges at the propagation centres. Rehabilitation work is ongoing at Mirabeau, Moran, Boulogne, Ashenden propagation stations, and the management of these stations is under significant review. We've seen a drop-off in the number of plants produced over the last 2 years. Again, climatic conditions had a major part to play within that, but resources are being sourced from external funds to see how those stations can be upgraded and the management structures improved. Farm labour support commenced in the Eastern District, prioritising those farmers who have the greatest need. The programme started late. There are a total of 9 teams comprising of 68 workers involved, and the funds that were apportioned to that, $215,000 extension. There were 13,000 extension visits to farms, significant number of visitations. What is interesting is the amount of training that is being focused on and the capacity building from 2018 to onwards in terms of the training of extension officers so that they are able to provide greater service to farmers. Pre-deal larceny, we're seeing increase in the number of reported incidences. There is an assessment being done whether it is the incidences of crimes have increased or whether the incidence of reporting increased is due to the greater public awareness, but there is still a lot of work to do, a lot of attention that needs to be placed on that area. I'm going to move quickly on to fisheries. I spoke earlier about increases in production this year, both in terms of what's been landed and what has been sold. And the ministry continues to work with fisher folks, certainly in the areas of quality assurance, ensuring that the quality of catch landed is at the greatest quality levels possible so that the highest export prices can be attained. And the Victoria Fish Market, the refurbishment of that was completed, and works continue at Gove and Grenville Fish Markets. Mr. President, I will quickly move on to the Ministry of Economic Development, Trade and Planning and just speak to a couple of key points. One of the critical roles that this ministry has is the mobilization of grant and concessional facilities to enable the government to fund many of its capital projects. These are projects that support our national development, support the creation of new jobs. And under that, resource mobilization of $280 million in grant and concessionary loans has been sourced in a number of areas. In the area of climate and natural disaster financing, $123 million for new grants, concessionary loans, a number of initiatives with the Green Climate Fund, the award of $1 million to build capacity in our institutions here so we can access some of the $10 billion that fund has available. And within that, we have a major project, a water project valued at $48 million US with the GCF, which will upgrade and provide greater capacity to our water sector. Mr. President, Deputy President, I will move on very quickly to just some highlights of some of the other areas within the budget. The first, Mr. President, support for small business development under this administration is unprecedented. To date, under the Grenada Development Bank Small Business Development Fund, 750 loans have been approved to the value of $8.3 million. 1,193 jobs have been positively affected, either jobs retained in the existing small to medium enterprises or new enterprises and new jobs. Loans have been dispersed in 32 different market sectors, ranging from agriculture and agribusiness, fisheries, tourism, ICT, light manufacturing, the arts. Mr. Deputy President, I wish to draw specific attention to the fact that a total of 120 loans were approved for the fishing sector, amounting to over $1.7 million. So again, support for that sector. Finally, Mr. President, in 2018, the financial products of the Micro Enterprise Development Fund will be strengthened to meet the needs and repayment capabilities of our young and aspiring entrepreneurs. Mr. President, with all of these programs, a high percentage of our youth and women in particular are recipients of these loans and are leading this entrepreneurial charge, a further demonstration of this administration's commitment to the youth of this nation. Housing. Addressing the housing needs of our people is one of the key priorities of this administration, and we recognize these needs go beyond just providing basic shelter. The need is to provide affordable access to decent housing and uplifting the housing standards for the people of our nation. Mr. President, this year 117 families received assistance under the soft loan program, with total disbursements amounting to $2 million. This is in addition to the 119 families who received assistance in 2016. Under the National Home Repair and Improvement Program, more than 1,300 individuals received assistance to improve their housing conditions in 2017 at a cost of $5.5 million. Once again, this is in addition to the 1,265 families who benefited in 2016. Mr. President, work is about to start on the second phase also of the Chinese low-income program, providing homes for 647 families. This is in addition to the 353 housing units that had already been handed over to families. Mr. President, these are significant steps in addressing our housing needs. Mr. Deputy President, with regard to youth empowerment and employment, Mr. Deputy President, this administration's approach to addressing the challenges of youth unemployment go far beyond the significant support already provided through the Imani program. Yes, 3,735 young men and women have already benefited from the Imani program's formal training, life skills, and on-the-job training provided, of which close to 2,000 have graduated with CVQs and NVQs, and hundreds more graduating to receive university scholarships and permanent work. Mr. President, the combined actual spend of the Ministry of Youth under this administration amounts to $260 million. This is since we've been in office, compared to a total of just $76 million under the previous administration. In addition, the 930 university scholarships that have been awarded to our young men and women over the past 4.5 years bachelor's degrees, masters, PhDs, valued at $186 million compared to $73 million spent under the previous administration. The hundreds of young men and women who have received small business loans and other support to set up their own businesses. And to be introduced in 2018, a new policy stipulating that all new public sector procurement contracts will include social clauses that encourage contractors to provide entrepreneurs, apprenticeships and employment for a quota of young people as part of their workforce. Mr. President, there is still much to be done in providing further opportunities for our youth, but we must not ignore the unprecedented levels of support that's currently being provided to tackle this issue head on. Health. Another area of critical importance for this government. Despite all of the challenges and constraints, this administration continues to work relentlessly to improve healthcare in this country. To this end, Mr. Deputy President, we have more doctors, more nurses, more healthcare professionals in our hospitals than ever before. In terms of infrastructure, the second phase of the construction of the General Hospital is nearing completion, and work is about to commence on retrofitting the Princess Alice Hospital and the health facilities in Karakou. We are also one step further on, Mr. Deputy President, with regard to the implementation or the introduction of the National Health Insurance system, with the establishment of a secretariat which will be responsible for overseeing the implementation of National Health Insurance. Mr. Deputy President, I just want to touch on social development. Mr. President, in response to the alarming increase in reporting incidences of child sexual abuse, a national committee for the prevention of child sexual abuse was established early in the year to engage with all stakeholders with a mandate to provide the necessary policy direction. In addition, increased budgetary support of $500,000 has been allocated to the Ministry of Social Development, which will oversee the establishment of a special victims unit, a special hotline to provide advice, guidance and other services, the introduction of a sex offenders register, and the strengthening and introduction of new legislation to facilitate all of this. As said, Mr. Deputy President, my colleagues will go into more detail on these. Mr. Deputy President, I just want to quickly run through some of the public and private sector projects, and there are many. Mr. President, these infrastructural activities are carried out by the Ministry of Works and provide the foundation of Grenada's economic and social development. So in terms of roads, Bellevue Concrete Road, $1.2 million, employing 20 workers. The new road network and other infrastructure works, which will be employing, some of the projects currently employing 50 persons, but in total, an investment of $21 million in employment of 320 people. St. Patrick's Road network upgrade. Preliminary works have started and main construction works will start in early 2018, employing approximately 250 workers and is valued at $27 million. Grenada Agricultural Feeder Roads, we spoke about that, employing 600 persons. The road maintenance, asphalt and road maintenance work which continues, valued at $4 million and employing 150 workers. Road maintenance debushing, $8 million invested in this current, in the completion of the fourth fortnight, and employing a total of 3,980 workers for each of those fortnights. The St. Patrick's Breakwater Project, protecting homes, businesses that were under threat by the coastal conditions, $4.6 million, employing 30 people. The Guave Extreme Rainfall Project, employing 100 workers.
President, in the chair.
Mr. President, the list goes on. Bridges, buildings, the Parliament building, the Governor General's residence, the works to start on Maurice Bishop International Airport, $66 million there. Mr. President, those public works are valued at creating somewhere in the region of 1,500 jobs. Okay. So, Mr. President, in terms of major private sector projects, we have seen activities in all areas, whether it is the construction of new hotels, whether it is the refurbishment of existing properties, whether it is the construction of shopping malls, retail outlets, the expansion of call centres. We're seeing significant, Mr. President, significant levels of investment across the board. When you add up all of the different projects, you're looking at somewhere close to $1 billion worth of externally funded projects and the creation of thousands of jobs, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, I will now move on to the area of fiscal relief. So we have seen significant activity both within the public sector. We're seeing significant economic activity within the private sector. This administration believes that it is the government's responsibility to create an enabling environment to allow the private sector to generate and to be that engine of growth, and that is precisely what we have seen and what we are seeing with the creation of many, many new jobs up and down the country, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, one of the underlying principles of every new National Party administration has been and continues to be to ensure that as much of every dollar an individual or business earns remains at their disposal. However, this principle must always be balanced against the fundamental responsibility of each and every one of us to pay our fair share in order to support our national development needs and service such as education, healthcare, our infrastructure, protecting our vulnerable, and so forth. This principle and our fundamental responsibility was tested on entering office in 2013, with the need to introduce specific measures to place our nation and economy back on a path to recovery. Together with the support of the social partners, we asked the nation to play an important role in this process. We asked for shared sacrifice in the implementation of the homegrown structural adjustment program. Mr. President, the promise made was that with shared sacrifice comes shared benefit, once the fiscal space allows. The government has already demonstrated its commitment to this promise. In 2017, responsibly rolling back taxes in selected areas to bring fiscal relief to workers, businesses, and pensioners. From January of this year, personal income tax was reduced from 15% down to 10%. There was a removal of personal income tax on pensions, and stamp tax was reduced from 0.75% down to 0.7%. Mr. President, by June 2018, if the fiscal space allows, we will consider a number of additional measures aimed at bringing further fiscal relief and generating more disposable income for our people. They include reducing the rate of personal income tax in the different categories by 5%, reducing corporate income tax from 30 to 25% to encourage businesses to continue to invest. And we'll also look to increase the public assistance for the elderly from $200 to $300 per individual. And this is to help improve the livelihoods and the dignity of our senior citizens. And then the commitment, once the fiscal space allows, for the repaving of the Grand Anse to St. George Road and other roads at the heart of the business sector and the productive areas here in St. George's. Mr. President, there are those who mock the term, if the fiscal space allows. Mr. President, how else can you manage an economy? How can you spend if the fiscal space does not allow it? There is only one responsible answer to the question, and that is, no, you cannot spend what you do not have. Unless, of course, you wish to go back to those old times where you had to sell assets to pay salaries, Mr. President. But, Mr. President, we do not want to go back there. The issue of pension reform. Finally, Mr. President, pension reform. This government is committed to resolving the long outstanding issue of pensions to retired public officers, the first administration to do so since 1983. The pension liability is a significant one, and the process of addressing this in a fiscally responsible manner is a complex one. Nonetheless, government has engaged the unions and the pensions associations to collaboratively address this very important issue. To this end, government has established a pension secretariat with dedicated staff and resources to give technical and administrative support to progress the process, finding an equitable and sustainable solution to bring in relief to those public officers who are now retired or who are to retire in future. Recognizing that a final solution will take some time to formulate, government has stated its willingness to consider making prepayments to those public officers experiencing financial difficulties. So, Mr. President, in concluding, I wish to end as I started by restating that comparisons are important and comparisons do matter. It's only by comparing are we able to see where we came from. It's only by comparing are we able to see where we are today. And it's only by comparing can we see where we are to go in the future. Mr. President, the budget before us reflects the considerable progress made in Grenada over the past 4.5 years, bringing fiscal stability and leadership to the affairs of the nation. It is a balanced budget grounded in sound fiscal management principles, a budget that responsibly builds on strong economic and fiscal performance, a budget that supports growth and job creation, a budget that provides more opportunities for our youth, a budget that supports improved access to healthcare, a budget that supports greater educational opportunities for our children and our youth, a budget that provides more housing and housing assistance for those in need, a budget that provides more support for the agricultural sector and our rural communities, a budget that protects the most vulnerable, a budget that provides additional support for our elderly, a budget that supports businesses and business development. Mr. President, a budget that meets the needs of the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martin. So, Mr. President, that question again. Are we better off today than we were back then? And the answer, Mr. President, the answer is a resounding yes, we are better off today than we were back then. Mr. President, I thank you.
So that in effect you will have an hour and 45 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, first of all, I want to apologize to you and to the House, to the members of the Senate for my tardiness this morning. I did hear your concerns strongly expressed as I drove to the Parliament this morning, and I understand them. I have to say to you, Mr. President, and to the House that I am caught at this moment in a very difficult tide of a number of things are happening, as it turns out, today and tomorrow which I cannot escape, including the burial tomorrow of my dear aunt in Karaoke, which I absolutely cannot miss. And there's some other activities. My family members who are coming in from the United States, several of them have had to be traveling back and forth. Most of them live in the US. Some have lost their luggage. There's just a tremendous amount of things happening. And while I tried to get a flight tomorrow morning, I don't think I will get one tomorrow morning. The plane only takes 8 people. And so I want to apologize first this morning for my tardiness, but also to say to you, Mr. President, that regrettably, I will not be able to remain in the House this afternoon. I would have to go. There's some things that I must get done this afternoon, and I have to be in Karaoke. There's no escaping that. I have to be either presenting the eulogy tomorrow or at least reading messages. That's the nature of the relationship. So I want to apologize to you in advance and to my colleagues that I will have to leave after my presentation. Thank you very much, then, Mr. President, for your indulgence. Mr. President, I want to ask you to think for a moment of a teenager who just got his driver's license. His parents decided that they will give him the use of the car because he's gotten his license. And he then starts driving and using the car in a very reckless way, causing the parents tremendous amount of headaches and unnecessary expenses. They warn him about his recklessness. They urge him to be more responsible, but he would not listen. In frustration, his parents decide to deny him the use of the car. They decided what we're going to do from now on is that we're not going to give you this car to drive anymore. Instead, we are going to drive the car and we will take you wherever you have to go. We're not going to prevent you from going anywhere that you have to go, but we are going to take you there. And you will not have the use of this car. You will not be allowed to drive this car anymore. Think of the young teenager. Instead of seeing that as a punishment, instead of seeing the decision not to give him the use of the car as a punishment for his reckless behavior, he's going around boasting that he now has a chauffeur to drive him wherever he has to go, and that he no longer has to drive himself. As I listened to the Prime Minister speaking about the budget, and to some extent listening to the Senator this morning, I could not help but find that analogy, that you behave in an extremely reckless way. Somebody decides to punish you because of your recklessness, and then you turn around and you're boasting that you've been rewarded somehow for what you've done. Frankly, as I watched the Prime Minister, I could not help but feel sad for him to see this natural spendthrift, to see where he had found himself and where he had brought Grenada. Mr. President, after 13 years of economic recklessness as Prime Minister, borrowing people's money, spending it on fly-by-night projects, using the authority of the state to guarantee loans for international crooks, using the NIS money to embark on pie-in-the-sky arrangements, giving away thousands of acres of land owned by the people to men of straw, borrowing, not being able to pay back the people, the international financial community, then finally decided enough is enough. They'll have no more of it. They finally decided to ground him, imposing a fiscal responsibility law on him requiring him to have above him a fiscal overseer, as he called it, to make sure he does what he does. And then to make sure he takes his economic medicine and force feed him if he doesn't take his economic medicine, so that they can get the money back. The money they lend him that he squandered. And now he's going around boasting and testifying. I have a big, nice law that I passed, and I want other Caribbean countries to follow it. That's really what we are seeing, Mr. President. I found this whole presentation pathetic, to be quite blunt. Mr. President, the tragedy of this whole saga is that when the international community decided to teach the Minister of Finance, the driver of the car, the lesson, it is not only he who feels it, not only him who feels it. The 110,000 passengers in the car also feeling it. That's the tragedy of the whole thing. The public workers who have been asking for their one-off payment, who cannot get their one-off payment, they're feeling it. The thousands of unemployed single mothers in our country, Mr. President, they're feeling it. The 21,500 young people in this country who are unemployed, they're feeling it. The 4,000 families, they say 3,980, I'm sure there's another 20 out there, who desperately want a debushing job but can't get one. But they say 3,980. I'll round it off, 4,000. The 4,000 families who have to depend on 3 fortnights for the entire year under the debushing program. They're feeling it, Mr. President. The families who are unable to buy medicine for their loved ones who are hospitalized, who are unable to get the tests done, the diagnostic tests, whether we're talking about blood tests or CT scans or MRIs, who are unable to pay the $1,500 and the $2,000 to get these basic tests done at the private institutions. They're feeling it. The homeowners, Mr. President, who can barely manage to pay their mortgage and cannot even afford to pay the insurance. So they're living in fear that if something happens in their home, while the mortgage is paid, the insurance, the home insurance is not paid. They're feeling it. Mr. President, the students who finish high school, in some cases 9, 10, 11 CXCs. In some cases they've gone on to TAMCC and done an associate degree, who cannot find a job and have to be doing the same job as their parents who cannot read and write, their parents who invested in them to ensure that they get a better quality of life and made sacrifices to ensure that they get a better quality of life, and now they're competing for debushing jobs, parents and child competing for debushing jobs on the road. They're feeling it. Mr. President, as one of the songsters said, who feels it, knows it. And so when we hear this kind of cheap talk and testify and testify and testify and so on, there's only one set of people testifying. Those who are testifying are the ones who are not feeling it. Those who are testifying are the ones who drinking milk and honey when the rest of the people sucking salt in the country, Mr. President. That's what this is about. Mr. President, the budget of a nation is more than a mere statement of revenue and expenditure for the upcoming year. The budget is supposed to be a vital tool for national development. It must envision and articulate a delicate mix of policies and policy measures that will address the socio-economic development of the country. It must do so through an efficient appropriation of public resources. To be credible, Mr. President, and this is where I want to drive the point. To be credible, these policy measures cannot be a scattershot, must not be a scattershot approach to economic and social engineering. It must, the proponents of that policy must lay out a clear vision for the development of the country and the society, a plan to show how it will be achieved, a clear order of priorities. What are the things that are important? The various policy options that are available to them, and a demonstrated commitment, Mr. President, to those priorities. Not come in defense when faced with an attack from the agricultural community and the nation at large, for example, for what you've done to agriculture. You come and try to rationalize and find an excuse as to how you're going to justify what has happened in your allocations. It must be based on a clear order of priorities where you see some strategic value in a sector and you decide this is where we're going to put the money because this is where we're going to get value for money. Mr. President, the Prime Minister, as he presented the budget, and today the Senator, I could not help but ask myself, as he presented as well, what is the vision for the Grenada economy? Yes, forget the long list of projects. We've seen those list of projects, Mr. President. I never forget the 2006 one. When the list of hotels were read out and the number of jobs that they were creating, the number of jobs exceeded the labor force of the country. I will never forget that one. I will never forget all the sword-turning ceremonies that we've seen across the country. Mount Hartman, Rivera, all of these have happened before. I will never forget the tractors start digging up the place that was supposed to be the Rivera Hotel. When the Prime Minister came here and said, the Rivera project, as we speak, the tractor is there digging up the place. I will not forget these things. So when I hear this kind of grandstanding and testifying, I don't bother with that. You know it, Mr. President. You've been in this house. You've heard all this cheap talk before. So I am not impressed by these statements. A good approach, Mr. President, to evaluating the credibility of a budget is first consider what is the present Grenada economic reality. That's the first step. If we are going to assess whether our budget is a good budget or a bad budget, whether our budget is a sufficient budget or an insufficient budget, whether our budget is a credible budget or an incredible budget, it must start with an assessment of the present economic and social environment in which you find yourself. Because that will determine how appropriate is your choice of policy measures. That will determine how appropriate is your allocation of resources to the respective sectors that you've assigned. So I want to spend some time looking, Mr. President, at that present economic reality. But before I do so, having considered the present reality, the second thing that must be done is to identify what is the government going to do about it. What is the government trying to achieve? Third, evaluate the wisdom of the policy choices that you're going to make, and then assess whether the policy measures and financial allocations that you outline are in sync with the government's policies and objectives. Because it's one thing even to say that I see citizenship by investment as important, but if you don't invest any money in citizenship by investment and you see it as a strategic area of economic activity, nothing will happen. If you say you see tourism as important, as contributing so significantly to the economic life of the country, but you're not prepared to invest any money in it, then it's mere talk, because the resources must match the strategic value that you assign to the area of economic activity and to the projects and programs that we are talking about. So in assessing the budget, Mr. President, the first thing we must do is take stock of the present environment in which we find ourselves. Mr. President, Grenada is at the end of a 3-year structural adjustment period in which the population has endured 3 years of austerity. This period of austerity, which ended, by the way, December 31st, 2016, so we are now in the end of, we are at the end virtually of the 4th year of structural adjustment, right? Even though the program has officially ended, the austerity measures and the austerity programs remain in force. Nothing fundamentally has changed. We have an austerity program in place. That involved a wage freeze for all public workers. That's the context in which this budget is now being assigned, yes? A wage freeze for all public workers. Implementation of a freeze on hiring in the public sector. and the institution of what was called an attrition policy. I think the beer drinkers call it 3 for 1 or 3 for 10. Some kind of name like that they've assigned to it. Right? We will take on 3 workers. When we get rid of 10 workers, we'll take on 3 to replace them, including nurses and doctors in the hospital. The 3 for 1 policy. That austerity program included the imposition of 28 different taxes, fees, charges, levies, duties. This, Mr. President, resulted in a marked reduction in disposable incomes of the population across the board, especially the middle-income earners. Job loss by some independent contractors and self-employed persons. Now, Mr. President, there are those who would like to tell us otherwise. I can point to specific people that I know who had somebody ironing the clothes that decided they're not doing that anymore. Who had somebody cutting the lawn that decided they're not doing it anymore. Who had specific people doing certain things in and around their homes and providing certain services that they simply cannot afford anymore in light of the reduction in their disposable earnings as a result of the myriad of taxes, levies, fees, and duties that have been imposed on the population. Mr. President, economic insecurity among thousands of workers in our country, including the public workers, who have been struggling for their one-off payment, only to be met by ridicule, by disrespect, and at times abuse. Being mocked by the Prime Minister himself, being accused of corruption, and a number of other things that we are hearing in relation to the public workers as they seek to say, listen, we have made a sacrifice. We've done so for the longest while. We're asking for $1,500. You've given your press secretary $12,000, not a one-off, $12,000, an increase of $1,000 a month in perpetuity, almost, because as long as she's working, she'll get that money. We're asking for $1,500 as a one-off payment, and you come in and attack us and calling us all kind of names and making all kind of allegations. Yeah? This is happening in a situation where there are concerns by the public workers for their occupational health and safety. This is happening where the job insecurity among many Grenadian workers who are working on contract, Mr. President, some of them 2 months, some of them 3 months. They get the contract, they work for the 2 months, they send them home, they bring them back and so on. And of course, the private sector is taking the lead from the public sector. Mr. President, reduction in the social safety nets is another feature of this austerity period. This free school books program has been effectively abandoned. The duty-free barrels program has been effectively abandoned. The Energy for the Poor program have been effectively abandoned. The claims that they were going to see changes have not occurred. High unemployment. Thank you, Mr. President. It should be noted I did not disturb anybody in the presentation. I'm thanking you for doing your job. High unemployment. The primary source of government job creation being the debushing program. The primary source of government employment, the debushing program, 3 fortnights per year for 4,000 families. 52% unemployment among the youth. I will take issue with the claims about 25% unemployment in a moment. I'll come to that later on. The Imani program, failing to meet the expectations of the young people. All of this is the context in which this program is being presented. We had an opportunity, Mr. President, to speak with over 300 Imanis, just over 300 Imanis over the last 12 months. We consciously decided we are going to talk to the Imanis to try to understand how they view this program, what do they see as its strengths, what do they see as its weaknesses, how would they like to see this program enhanced or improved or upgraded in order to ensure that this program can be built on by a responsible government. Among the things that came out of the conversations is that while the young people welcome and appreciate the $700 or $800 that they're getting, they have serious concerns about how the program is run. Some raise concerns about politicization in the way that recruitment takes place. Some raise concerns about politicization in the length of time that they get to stay in the program. Some raise concerns about politicization in the places they are sent to work, in the placements. Others raise concern, Mr. President, that the program was not sufficiently wide to ensure that some of the critical areas of interest, including manufacturing, including the cultural industries, the entertainment industries, and sports, were not being provided for and covered, which is a big area for them. Others raise concern, Mr. President, that as far as they were concerned, they would like to see a situation in which the government, for example, negotiates with the governments of the OECS countries, that as part of a 2-year training program, they can probably go to St. Vincent, spend 3 months there as part of a training, have some Vincentian students come here, do 3 months, to broaden their horizons and to meet more people and to give them a chance to plant a foothold so that if and when they get their CVQs, they can then in turn take up a job somewhere else. In other words, the kids are thinking months, years ahead of what the government is thinking itself in respect of the program. In other words, without using those words, the kids are pointing to a lack of imagination in the way that the Imani program is being run. Mr. President, agricultural production in the country has declined for the 2nd year in a row. Cocoa production has fallen. The price of nutmegs on the international market, according to the government's own figures, has fallen by 60%. The price of nutmegs on the international market has fallen by 60% since 2013. The price of maize on the international market has fallen by 48% since 2013. As far as I know, the farmers have not received any bonuses. The agricultural farmers have not received any bonuses. According to the figures published by the minister himself, Grenada's export earnings from the sale of goods to the rest of the world fell from $79.8 million in 2016 to $24.7 million in 2017. That's the context in which the budget is being presented, yes? The MNIB purchases of crops other than cocoa and nutmegs, and by the way, we've moved from number 2 in the world in nutmeg production to number 9 in the world today, yes? That's the context in which this strategic budget for the future of the country and future direction and trajectory of the country is being presented. MNIB, other than cocoa and nutmegs in 2017, there was the purchases by MNIB from the farmers was in 2017 was 3/4, 75% of what it was in 2016. Farmers, of course, that means farmers' incomes would have suffered in a corresponding way. Because if the farmers are depending on that for income and the MNIB is not buying, then of course their incomes have gone down. Livestock production has been significantly reduced since 2013. Today, Mr. President, it is no secret, a large number of sheep, goats, and cattle are being imported from St. Vincent and the Grenadines to meet the need for fresh meat in our country today. That's the context in which we are standing up and boasting and so on. Yes? Fish, which until 2013 was the fastest growing subsector in the economy, saw catch reduced to roughly 10% lower than it was in 2016. Now, Mr. President, I don't know if I misheard the Honorable Senator, but I heard him to be saying that fish stocks, fish catch had gone up this year, and the amount of fish sold had gone up this year. I don't know if all of this happened between the day that the Prime Minister presented the budget and today. But what we have seen, Mr. President, I would simply refer my friend to page 64 of the budget statement, which speaks very clearly on what is happening to fishing in the country. Preliminary data indicate a contraction in the fishing sector as evident by a reduced catch for the period January to June by 10%, 9.3%. Overall, the sector is expected to decline by 7.5% in 2017. Challenges remain with respect to storage facilities at the airport. In other words, even the fish that is caught, when the farmers are trying to export that from the country, they're having challenges because there are no refrigeration facilities or inadequate refrigeration facilities at the airport. And this, Mr. President, is happening, don't forget, in a context where the Prime Minister is talking about building a hotel on the airport, last year. I don't know if it started yet. Last year budget said they were going to build a hotel on the airport. This year budget said they're going to build a runway, another runway. Now, Mr. President, because they're going to borrow 170 million EC dollars to build this new runway. Now, you can't even put some refrigeration on the airport. You cannot even put some refrigeration on the airport to ensure that the fishermen don't lose their fish. And you're talking about borrowing 170 million EC dollars from another country because you want to build another runway. This is the context in which this so-called budget and testimony is being presented. It's been presented. So let's look at it. Mr. President, the number of cruise passengers coming to Grenada fell by 16.5% in 2017 compared to 2016. I'm not making up anything. I'm taking everything that I say from this document. And if I'm wrong, then challenge me. The number of cruise ship passengers coming to Grenada fell by 16.5% in 2017 compared to what it was in 2016. While private education, that's the context, while private education continues to be the largest contributor to Grenada's GDP, 22%, Trinidadian students are no longer entitled to tuition support from the government. The American students, because of changes in the U.S. federal student loan programs, we are told that these changes pose a serious threat to the ability of the university, SGU, to attract students from the United States, which is its primary source market. So, Trinidad pulled back, the U.S. is pulling back. There's a threat to the sector that you consider to be your largest sector contributing to the economy. Yes? So you have to ask yourself, all right, this sector is now responsible for 22%. There's a problem, there's a threat, there's an emerging threat. What do I do? How do I do it? How do I prepare for that? What happens if this becomes a reality? What is my siege plan? What is my strategic alternative? These are the kinds of questions, Mr. President, that will inform budget preparation and decision making. And these are the kinds of questions that will determine how you allocate monies in the budget. Your strategic choices and your financial allocations. These are the kinds of questions and queries that will tell you whether or not you're putting a good budget in place. There is widespread anxiety brought on by the increased incidence of sexual violence against women, against children, increased incidence of begging in the society, the information that we are picking up, increased incidence of mental illness among families, with a failure on the part of the authorities to seriously address the condition in that medical facility where there's a massive overpopulation. Unemployment, we have been told, is 24%. I will come to that in a moment. It is our assessment that unemployment is 31.7% in Grenada today. And I will tell you why we say so and how we came to that number. Unemployment, 31.7% generally across the country, 52% among the young people in the country. Poverty, Mr. President, by the statistics that were published by a study that was commissioned by this government itself some years ago, is as high as 40%, right? Because we are told it's 56% in St. Patrick, it's 54% in St. Mark, it's 44% in St. Andrew. These are the rural communities. And that takes me to the other point, Mr. President, which is as part of the analysis that a government will do to determine how it's going to allocate its resources. What is the state of the rural economy? What are the conditions in the rural economy? How do things compare in St. Patrick or St. Andrew today to what is going on between Point Saline Airport and the Grandlands Post Office? Yes? In other words, are we seeing balanced development? Are we seeing a situation in which a young person living in St. Patrick, finish school, get their CXCs or their associate degree, looking for a little work, can go to any business place in their own communities and get a job? Has there been any genuine attempt to revitalize the rural economy in the wake of the collapse of banana, cocoa, and nutmegs? What are the alternatives? What is the government seeing as the way forward for the development of these communities, these outlying parishes, these rural areas where people are forced to drift, to come to St. George's, Montu and Granans Valley and other areas to look for a place to stay, to look for a livelihood, to see if they can get something to do, right? Living under unsanitary conditions in some cases, without running water, without proper toilet facilities and so on. What is the government seeing as the alternative to what now exists in the rural communities? What is the strategic focus? What are the resources that are going to be employed to create an alternative livelihood for all the thousands of people in those communities, Mr. President? What exactly does the government have in mind? Is it community tourism? How much money has been allocated to community tourism, for example? What is the alternative? Do we see the possibility for education? Is it possible to set up or to collaborate with an institution that might set up a school or a university campus somewhere in St. Andrew that will do for St. Andrew and St. Patrick what SGU is doing for Grenada, for Granans and the South and St. George's? What are the alternatives? These are the questions that must inform, Mr. President, how does a government make its decisions and whether or not the budget that we are hearing is a budget that is deserving of any kind of praise or whether or not it is an abject failure. And that's why I will come to those issues in a moment. Mr. President, issues concerning investor confidence. Now, we have been told that investor confidence was an all-time low under the NDC, and that the NDC was, as I drove in the car, I heard the Honorable Senator accusing the NDC of victimizing investors. Now, Mr. President, I had to steady myself so I don't get into an accident when I heard that, because I really could not believe that this senator was standing there and accusing the NDC of victimizing investors. Mr. President, any reasonable person looking and listening will come to the conclusion that this government is embarked upon a systematic program of persecution, against Grenlec. It started from 1994. It has continued systematically. We have seen, Mr. President, a case in which, no doubt because of the sacking of Minister Gregory Bowen back then, not minister at the time, but because of his sacking in 1994 for incompetence, they never let go of that decision. And the government, what is happening is that these individuals is using the authority of the state and the power of the state and the apparatus of the state to punish a particular private enterprise because of what they did back in 1994. In other words, this is vindictiveness. That's spitefulness. That's not, when you speak in, if you want a classic case of vindictiveness and spitefulness towards an investor, this is the case. When this government came into office in 2013, one of the first things that they did was to announce that they're buying Grenlec shares without talking to Grenlec. Grenlec had to organize a press conference to say, we're not selling our shares. The first thing they had to do was organize a press conference to say, we're not selling our shares because the government wants to negotiate and exchange publicly and hold this confrontational posture in dealing with the company, a private company. Mr. President, when the time came, the United States government, former Vice President Biden, came to the Caribbean. The Caribbean leaders went to the United States. They discussed a climate security program, an energy security program for the Caribbean. They agreed to make Grenada the host country, the pilot nation for the program. I went to the United States. I spoke with some people in Washington, Mr. President. I asked them, how is that going? They asked me if I was crazy, that the American government will never put their money in a country and with a government that was persecuting or trying to persecute one of its companies. As a result of the arbitrary, high-handed and arrogant behavior of the leaders of this government, the government of the United States pulled that program, and it's now been sent to St. Lucia. That's spitefulness. Mr. President, when the time came to change the law, to the law concerning energy, electricity supply, we urged, and Grenlec urged, that the government should engage in talks, negotiations. The government decided it did not have to sit and negotiate with any private company. It can bully its way through. And they passed a law. They ran a series of ads, radio and television ads for weeks, basically selling the nation that the reason they're doing it is that they're going to reduce electricity prices. We said then and we say today, this government is not capable of reducing any electricity prices by this kind of grandstanding. That it has to negotiate before it legislates. And that in the absence of this, what's going to happen is that Grenlec will take the government to the International Tribunal, Arbitration Tribunal, ICSID, and Grenlec will ask the tribunal to pay, for Grenada to pay $170 million EC dollars, in damages for breach of contract. That matter is now before ICSID. Yes? The government still continues, in spite of that situation, the government still continues this aggressive, muscular approach to dealing with a private company. As a result, Mr. President, they passed the law saying that, well, from now on, the social fund, the monies that Grenlec has in its private partnership initiative, 5% of its pre-tax profits, which is shareholders' money, by the way. Pre-tax profits is shareholders' money. The government has no say in what happens above the line. The government can speak about what happens below the line. That's a normal practice. That's normal business ethic. And that's what civilized governments do. Mr. President, they decided that they were now going to pass a law or amend the law to ensure that from now on, they will take 5% of the pre-tax profits of the government, of the company effectively by stipulating that they effectively do so by stipulating that the minister was going to choose who the committee was. A situation where the committee itself, as it's presently constituted, has a member on the 5-person committee appointed by the government, a good friend of the Minister of Works and Public Utilities, a person who is chosen, 2 members of the board, one of whom is a good friend of the NNP organization. One is a member of the company, and a 5th person who was chosen by the community, for the community, and has no political axe to grind. Yes? But the company is now the target of an vindictive and spiteful conduct on the part of this government because they don't like what happened back in 1994. And then you come in and talk about this spitefulness and vindictiveness towards investors. Mr. President, we can go on about how this government has been dealing with Rex Grenadian. The arrogance of fighting with this company. The company has had to go to court to defend itself. The courts have ruled in its favor, and the government will not let up. The arrogance is unspeakable. And so to come, Mr. President, and speak about us trying to spite governments simply holds no water. It is an empty and really ridiculous claim that must be rejected at hand. And Mr. President, we want to make it clear that this is not child's play. The fact of the matter is, if you're talking about investor confidence, you must seriously address the question of doing business. In 2011, Grenada's doing business ranking, organized by the, which is conducted by the International Financial Corporation, the IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank, ranked Grenada 73rd in the world of 189 countries, ranking from first, number 1 being the easiest to do business in the world, to 73rd in the world of 189 countries. Today, Grenada ranks 143. In other words, we have plummeted from flying at 40,000 feet to flying at 20,000 feet. That's effectively what has happened. Imagine being in a plane flying at 40,000 feet and the plane just dropped to 20,000 feet. That's what has happened to Grenada since this government came in. And you're talking now about business confidence. How does the government respond to that? The government says we will put together a committee led by Senator Steele and 2 other ministers of the government. The same ministers who is showing an impotence, who is showing incompetence in handling the thing, are the same ones that they reappointed and reappointed and reappointed year after year, and the numbers just keep getting worse and worse and worse every year, Mr. President. Not realizing that you must, if you genuinely believe in stakeholder involvement and consultation. You must set up a structure that includes the business community, that includes the trade union movement, that includes the NGO, that includes technical people who understand what is going on and how the doing business ranking works before you can just make pronouncements and try to bully people into that situation. Mr. President, this is the context, this is the situation in which this budget is being presented. And so, Mr. President, as I evaluate the budget, I have to ask myself, okay, given what we now face, is the budget that was presented in the country, is the budget that was presented by the Prime Minister a good budget, a sufficient budget? Does it tackle the questions that need to be tackled? Or is it simply grandstanding? Because this is not about just saying I'm testifying. This is about economic management and making the right choices. Yes? This is not about a case where somebody punishing you because of your behavior. 13 years of recklessness, and then you're turning around and blaming others. In 1995, when the Prime Minister of Grenada decided he was not going to, he wanted to win the election, so he's not going to impose income taxes. He's going to abolish income taxes, and he's advertising, if it's work you want, work you're going to get, and no taxes, and so on, and so on, and so on. The international financial community said to him, don't do that. You're going to hurt your country. The IMF told him so. The World Bank told him so. The European Union told him so. The Caribbean Development Bank told him so. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank told him so. Every single multilateral organization and development partner warned him against it. He boasted to the nation that they tell me not to do it, but I tell them I'm doing it anyway. Yeah? In other words, when he was going to embark on this course, he was warned about the consequences. And of course, because he could not raise the money, he turned to borrowing. He borrowed and borrowed and borrowed from $372 million in 1995 to $1.8 billion in 2008. Yes? And when that happened, Mr. President, right, $1.8 billion, the international community expressed their absolute concern about this. In 2008, the member says we must compare and remember where we're coming from. Where are we coming from? In July 2008, the country was overwhelmed by economic and social mismanagement, illegal and corrupt practices, and a lack of transparency and accountability. I'm not making up those words. Grenada's credit rating was the lowest of any sovereign nation in the Caribbean. This is Standard & Poor's speaking, Mr. President. Our public debt was approximately 1.7, not 1.8, I correct that, 1.7 billion, the fourth largest among speculative grade-rated countries in the world. Public debt was 107% of the GDP. In its report of May 21, 2008, Standard & Poor's noted that the low credit rating was the result of high debt levels, little progress in reducing the debt, poor fiscal discipline, lack of strategic planning, and a lack of political will to address the country's fiscal and structural issues. I'm not making that up. The report went on, Mr. President, and noted this. Without resolute fiscal consolidation, the positive momentum brought on by the 2005 debt restructuring, don't forget, this government restructured the debt in 2005 already and came back to the problem in less than 3 years' time. They restructured in 2005, and by 2008, they were right back where they started in 2005. They got the excuse then of the hurricane. But immediately after the hurricane, they went back into recklessness and came up with that situation. In fact, Mr. President, the report points out that the disbursements under the International Monetary Fund's Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility, though now being reconsidered by the fund, they're writing in 2008, have been on hold since 2006 because of the lack of fiscal discipline. Now you understand, Mr. President, why this word fiscal discipline keeps coming up by the Prime Minister so often. Because the international bondholders and those who borrow their money said, listen, we're going to deal with you on a second restructuring, but you're going to have to fall in line and behave yourself. From now on, we're going to appoint a fiscal overseer to deal with you. And this is the standard you're going to meet. If you don't meet these standards, forget it. So here we are. The spendthrift has finally met his match and is now forced to address some of the critical issues. That's why we're hearing about fiscal discipline. Not because this gentleman believes in fiscal discipline. He's a spendthrift by nature. And what we are seeing today, Mr. President, is that he's choked by the International Monetary Fund and the international financial community. In commenting on the change of administration in its report on July the 10th, 2008, Standard & Poor's observed this, and I'm quoting, short quotation, Mr. President. In Grenada, the political environment has been equally polarized amidst persistent allegation of the NNP's lack of transparency and mismanagement. End of quote. Nothing has changed. Lack of transparency and mismanagement. If you don't believe me, think of what has just gone on with the Postal Corporation. If you don't believe me, think of what has just gone on with Gravel and Concrete. We're going to deal with that as well, Mr. President. But the company, the Standard & Poor's goes on to say this, quotation again. As Belize and now Grenada show, the overwhelming victory of the opposition party is a clear response to the mismanagement, corruption, and consequent electoral dissatisfaction with the ruling party, which was in office for many consecutive terms. I'm not making this up. This is Standard & Poor's. So if we're talking about comparison, it is important that the member understands that this is what we inherited. This is what the NDC inherited. Do not pretend that this problem began in 2008. It is deceitful to pretend that it started in 2008. This is what we got. Yes, we are not responsible for the fact that the country by 2008 had given over $480 million in guarantees to people who turned out in the end to be international criminals who were on the run trying to evade justice. And we now have to pay that back. We are not responsible for that, Mr. President. The new National Party administration, led by Dr. Keith Mitchell, is responsible for it. And we must face the truth and stop blaming people for your own faults. Now you have the yoke around your neck, put on by the IMF. You come in and boast and say, well, look, this is a nice yoke, and I take my yoke and I put on my yoke, and I want other countries to come and follow and put on their yoke. They have to put on the yoke because they didn't behave like you. You behaved that way. You created your own problem, and let's not blame anybody else for what is going on, Mr. President. Mr. President, what then can we say about the government's objectives? As the Prime Minister presented, we heard a lot of, well, what we saw really was an exercise in smokes and mirrors, resorting to misrepresentation, deceit, and selfish patronage, really, to mask what we see as economic impotence. Economic impotence. That's what we see, Mr. President. Take a look at what they've done. Unemployment. Mr. President, a labor force survey was done in 2016. We have begged for that labor force survey. We have demanded that labor force survey. We have called on the minister to provide that labor force survey because they said in the budget that it was done. Last year, when they presented the budget, they said a labor force survey was done in September, October. No matter what we said, no matter how many times we called, that labor force survey of 2016 was never produced. And even today has not been produced. So that the statements that we are hearing and the numbers that we are seeing, we just have to close our eyes and pretend it's true. That's what they're saying. Take it from us. Even though we've told you these things before, and we've demonstrated by our conduct over the years that we cannot be trusted, take it from us. So we still have not seen that report. But here's what the report says. It says that, well, let me say first, the labor force, Mr. President, is the number of employed persons plus the number of unemployed persons of working age and ability at any time in the country. Yes, the labor force, number of employed persons plus number of unemployed persons of working age and working ability at any time in the country. The minister says that according to the 2017 labor force survey, the number of persons in the labor force was 55,268 persons. 55,268. And that this was a reduction from the size of the 2016 labor force, which was 56,998. In other words, between 2016 and 2017, the labor force shrunk in Grenada. unemployed plus employed, 1,730 people less were in the labor force in Grenada in 2017 than they were in 2016. Now, Mr. President, it is no secret about 2,000 students leave school every year in Grenada, roughly 1,000 from TAMCC, and then another 1,000 from the other secondary schools. Add to that 300 or so graduating from St. George's University and the other universities. You're getting up to 2,300 more or less joining the labor force every year. So if the labor force shrunk by 7, we're not saying unemployment or employment, the size of the labor force shrunk, even though an additional 2,300 people came on. The labor force was 1,700 less than it was the year before. Then we must ask the question, where did these people go? Is it that they migrated? Is it that they died? Is it that they went back to an age below 15 or 16? Something happened that they had some kind of transformation, that they're children again? So they're underage and therefore cannot be counted as workers? In other words, what explains this? Somebody has to be able to explain that to us and not just make these silly statements. Somebody has to be able to explain to us what happened. First of all, as I said, Mr. President, we have no credible information on 2016. But in order to impress, we want to see our labor force shrunk and so on. Mr. President, according to the Prime Minister himself, he says that the labor force fell by 2,822 people, not by the 1,730. The labor force fell, he said that in the statement also in this booklet. The labor force fell by 2,822 people, and that employment increased by only 1,095. So, if employment went up by 1,095, and the labor force fell by 2,822 people, we must ask the question again, where are these people? Are these numbers reliable? Can we count on these numbers? I did not hear the member speaking today say anything about that. We need to hear something about it. The other thing of critical importance, Mr. President, is this. The labor force survey is normally done in a week's time. Of course, there are computations and so that go on afterwards, but the information gathering, the survey itself, usually happens in a week's time, roughly. Sometime in the month of September or October, we don't have the information. But we have received information, Mr. President, according to the Prime Minister, that 3,980 persons are engaged in the debushing program. We have received information that the persons that when the survey was done, those 3,980 persons who get 3 fortnights a year were working. When the survey was done, 3,980 debushing workers were on the job. Officially, they are employed. And those numbers that we are hearing include this 4,000 people as employed people. So when the figures are done, we realize that, Mr. President, when these people finish their 2-week debushing program and they get their $400, they're gone back home, they have nothing, they're not employed. But the government is now using that information to come and say, employment gone down, unemployment gone down from 28% to 24%. That's what we are hearing, right? Mr. President, this kind of monkey trick would not apply, right? The Prime Minister says that unemployment went down. Unemployment went down to 13,257 people. Yes? But when we add back these workers that we're talking about, okay? When we add back these workers that we're talking about, according to the Prime Minister, unemployment went down to 13,257 people. But when we add back the 3,980 persons, we see that the unemployed went up from 13,257 to 17,237 people. And if I take 17,237 persons as unemployed in the country. That represents 31.2% of the labor force. In other words, you can't bring on 2 people, bring on 3,900 people for a debushing 2-week program, do the survey when they're on, and come and boast unemployment gone up and that employment gone up and unemployment gone down from 28% to 24%. According to the figures that we have, unemployment, the number of persons, if I take these numbers as correct, and the information we receive concerning the debushing workers as correct, the number of unemployed persons in the country is 17,237. And we don't accept those numbers because that is not true for the young people. There are closer to 21,000 young people in the country, and of which 2,500 of them are involved in the Imani program. But Mr. President, based on our assessment, the unemployment rate is closer to 31.2% in Grenada today. That's why we say that it's a smoke and mirror scenario that is being presented, and that is why, Mr. President, we are not going to take these numbers and be excited about them. We've looked at the situation with the public debt. The public debt, Mr. President, we hear all these fancy numbers about the public debt. What is the public debt in Grenada today? No matter how we ask, no matter what we say, no matter what the journalists ask, what is the size of the debt stock in Grenada? We cannot get an answer from the Prime Minister. And Mr. President, the Minister of Finance must be able to tell the nation what is the size of the country's debt stock. The information that we received looking at Appendix F seems to suggest, Mr. President, that the debt stock at the moment is $2,186,470,000. That's what I've been able to calculate from all that has been said. This number does not match what, from the written word, this is what we can extrapolate. This number does not match what is said in Appendix F. And so we ask again that the Prime Minister tell the nation what is the size of the public debt. We see the same smoke and mirrors when it comes to capital expenditure. The government allocated $154 million as what the monies they will spend on capital expenditure in presenting the budget in November of last year. $154 million. By June, they had spent about $40 million. But we are told that, yes, $46 million, I stand corrected on that number. But we are told now that by the end of this year, the government will have spent $117 million in capital expenditure out of the total 154. But they don't tell us that the government came to this house in July, presented a supplementary budget involving $86 million capital programs. That's not added to the 154. They are not telling us that in fact the budget was $240 million in capital expenditure. And that even if the government were to realize $117 million in capital expenditure, which is not true, 117 million out of 240 million is not even 50%. In other words, the government is still operating below a 50% implementation rate in respect of the budget. So these numbers, Mr. President, I'm not impressed by them, to be quite simple. I'm not impressed by them. We are seeing a lot of smokes and mirrors. And Mr. President, those who are impressed, we can only say, too bad for you. Much more is needed than what we are seeing there. Mr. President, when we listen to the government's articulation, to the minister's articulation of the priorities. So, we've spoken about the crisis, we've spoken about the challenges that are faced in Grenada today by the different groups of workers and people. We've spoken about the state of agriculture, we've spoken about the state of health, we've spoken about the economic and social challenges facing the country, And now we must assess, how does the government respond to that? What are the priorities that the government identified? The government says, okay, in light of all the challenges that you mentioned, in light of the situation with health, in light of the situation with agriculture, in light of the situation with tourism, in light of the situation with education, in light of the situation with the rural economy, in light of the situation with the young people, all of these challenges that we face, these are our 5 most important priorities. The government sets these out as the 5 most important priorities facing the country today. 1, guess, embedding fiscal discipline. At the end of a structural adjustment program, when you just took the people through 3 years of structural adjustment, plus another 1 year of informal structural adjustment, because nothing has changed. After 4 years of sacrifice, after 4 years of high taxes, after 4 years of low social benefits and safety net programs, you now say to the nation, the single most important priority, and the Governor General said it also in a throne speech, the single most important priority of the government is embedding fiscal discipline. Why? Because we want to safeguard the gains. We want to safeguard the gains. Whose gains, Mr. President? The IMF gains, the World Bank gains. Because these are, don't forget, the IMF is a financial institution. They lend money to people. They lend money. The difference between the IMF and a bank basically is that the IMF, its clients are sovereign nations, but they lend money and they impose conditions on their loans. Just like when you go to the bank and you take a mortgage, the bank will lend you some money. They tell you, listen, we're going to lend you the 200,000 to build a house, but this is what you have to do. And they spell out the conditions, right? And we will hire somebody to come and check when you tell us phase 1 of the project finished. We're not just releasing phase 2 money. We're sending our own overseer to come and check and make sure that the project is where it is so we could let go phase 2. That's what we're facing here. That the banks, the international financial community, has imposed a regime of structural penalties on this government where the overriding response is fiscal discipline, and the government has no choice but to make that. Imagine a spendthrift telling you, my first priority is fiscal discipline. That's not going to happen under the sun if this gentleman had a choice. So, what are the 5 priorities? 1, embedding fiscal discipline. 2, managing fiscal risks. 3, modernizing the public sector in order to make it more suitable for the 21st century. 4, building economic resilience. 5, being strategic and results-oriented in our approach to long-term development planning. Notice we don't even say we go put a plan in place. We don't even say we go put a development plan in place. Being strategic and results-oriented with our approach to long-term development planning, whatever that means, Mr. President. But what we are seeing here is that in the face of the situation that we are facing, at the tail end of a structural adjustment program, this is what the government sees as its single most important or 5 most important priorities. Now, Mr. President, I will be the first to admit these are important things. I am not suggesting that fiscal discipline is not important. I am not suggesting that reforming the public sector is not important. I am not suggesting that managing fiscal risk is not important. I am not suggesting that being strategic about long-term development is not important. In fact, I agree with all of these things. I believe that they are important. But the question is, in the aftermath of 4 years of sacrifice, in the aftermath of 4 years of structural adjustment, in the aftermath of 4 years where people have had to forego so much and are experiencing so much, in the wake of the state of unemployment in the country, in the wake of the state of the rural economy and what is going on there, are these the only things that you see as top priorities, these 5 things, Mr. President? What about jobs for the young people? Is that a priority? What about employment of the 21,000 or so young people who have nothing to do? Is that a priority? What about business opportunities for young people? Those young kids who happen to have a brilliant business idea that they want to convert into some kind of commercial reality, right? They have a brilliant idea. They don't have the seed capital. They want to get started. What about that, Mr. President? What about that? Is that a priority? What about permanent jobs for the 4,000 debushers? Don't you think, Mr. President, that these 4,000 families deserve something more than 3 fortnights a week a year that we're boasting about? A fortnight is, from what I'm told, is about $430. Yeah? Mr. President, these 4,000 families, don't you think that they deserve something better? How can it be that our 5 priorities do not concern these people at all? Where is the budget? Where is the real budget? Where is the budget that focuses on strategic changes to address the needs of the populace? Where is the budget, Mr. President? What about the revitalization of agriculture in our country? We are hearing a lot of talk about, well, the 21 million is not really the 21 million because we are MAREP and we go fix that road and we go fix that road. Yeah, you go fix the road. But the reality is, Mr. President, the Prime Minister in his own conversation, when asked about cocoa farming, look what he says, Mr. President. Bear with me for 1 second. What he says about agriculture. When asked about the situation, he says, Mr. President, that the cocoa situation is what it is because, if you just bear with me for a second, Mr. President, I just want to share with you cocoa. In explaining the cocoa situation, he says here, Mr. President, at page 63 of the budget statement, in talking about cocoa production, he says, under cocoa production for the period January to September 2017 declined by 3.2% relative to the corresponding period for 2016. And he goes on to the rainfalls and so on. But listen to what he says. Interlocking canopies and adequate drainage on farms have also been responsible for high levels of moisture, which perpetuated the spread of black pod disease among the cocoa crops. Mr. President, this is a problem. If the will is there, if the will is there on the part of the government, this is a problem that can easily be solved. How can we sit and simply explain that it's because of interlocking canopies and inadequate drainage that we're facing the problem that we're facing in cocoa production, and that black pod disease and so on is there? What is the government prepared to do about this, Mr. President? In other words, how can we sit and pretend that this budget is a good budget? Do you think that the farmer is going to be impressed with this? How can we? In other words, what about the farmers? What about the revitalization of agriculture? What about the concerns of the farmers who are affected, Mr. President? What about a replanting program in cocoa and nutmegs to see if we can bring back some glory to our country as far as these products are concerned? Nutmeg has to be treated as our strategic product. Nutmeg is to Grenada what oil is to some countries. We have something that very few countries in the world have. And perhaps, Mr. President, if we decide that we're going to invest in nutmegs, yes, we will do well. We will do well. If we decide we're producing shoes, we'll have to compete with another 150 countries in the world that are capable of producing shoes. If we decide we're producing nutmeg and nutmeg products, we have to compete with only about 10 or 15 countries in the world. In other words, we start with a competitive advantage. And what I'm saying, Mr. President, is that to even write this, to even write a statement like this and come and read it to the nation by a minister of finance, a leader who has been prime minister in the country for 18 of the last 23 years, who was there when Hurricane Ivan occurred, who saw what happened to the collapse, to the destruction of the cocoa crop, who is aware of all the vines and the bacano trees and all the other stuff that is affecting agriculture. He must know this problem. So to come and say, well, the reason why cocoa is there is because of moisture and lack of drainage and so on. Don't come with that kind of statement. Why would I be impressed by that? We need to see much more from the Prime Minister. That's what leadership is about. That's what visionary leadership is about. It's not coming and just tell us that cocoa pods, well, you're wearing big tag and so on and you ain't doing what you're supposed to do. Mr. President, This is not impressive. This is not impressive. What about the Farm Labor Support Program? Farmers are crying out, we need some help. We don't have the money to pay people. Can you please use some of the people some of the 4,000 people that you have in the debushing program and help us out? Cut the debushing program perhaps from 4,000 to 2,000 and use 2,000 helping the farmers on the farms. And run some money in that program so that they can clear the drains and remove the canopies and so on. Huh? Mr. President, what about these people? How could we see fiscal discipline as our top priority, risk management as our top priority, reforming the public sector as our top priority? How can we see these things as the 5 most important things that the country has to do and ignore the fundamental livelihoods of the majority of the people of the country? Mr. President, what about the development of an agro-industrial plant, for example? After all these years, you have a budget of $1.1 billion. What about saying we're going to set up an agro-industrial plant? Grenada had one 40 years ago. Let's put back one in place. That will excite the farmers. That will excite the imagination of the farmers in Grenada, because they will see an opportunity to convert their produce into juices and nectars, into sauces and condiments, into desserts. They will see their produce being transformed into secondary and tertiary products. They will see their spices being transformed into toiletries and cosmetics. Invest in something like that, Mr. President. Don't come and tell us that your most important thing are these 5 things that really are just regulatory in nature. They are important. I want to emphasize. They are important. I'm not suggesting that they're not, but they cannot be the 5 most important things facing your country, because the challenges, the greatest challenges facing your country are not these 5 issues. It is important, Mr. President, to address these issues. What about the support for our poultry farmers and our livestock people? Does Grenada really need to be bringing in cattle and sheep and goats from St. Vincent? What about the poultry people? There's a great need and great desire for local chicken. It's no secret. People go to the supermarkets looking for local chicken. They want local chicken. We know, Mr. President, that there are risks associated with the consumption of some of the meats that come into the country. What about deciding I'm going to invest some money into the development of the poultry industry? What about support for community tourism? That you're going to say, all right, let's look at Fairdown's Camp. Fairdown's Camp is a heritage site, or if not, we will designate it a heritage site, that the people in St. John will have Fairdown's Camp upgraded so that when you come to Grenada as a tourist, one of your stops will be Fairdown's Camp, and you'll pay $20 and go there. And the people in St. John, Grand Roy, and so on, who do not now have something, can go and walking around, they can make something happen for themselves. How can it be, Mr. President, that after 23 years in leadership position, occupying different ministerial positions and cabinet portfolios, after 28 years of leading your party, after 33 years in the parliament, this is what you come in and bring to us and telling us, Mr. President, that you're going to testify? Testify about what? You're going to testify? Mr. President, what about the restoration of our forts? One of the first announcements the Prime Minister made in the manifesto when he came after the election was that he's going to move the police headquarters. Why not move it? Why not move the police headquarters so that we can turn the fort into a genuine site and restore it with the help of the French government? Will it take magic? I believe that the French government will help us to restore the forts. Recreate them, restore them, let them become sites. Send a few people in France, get some training. We have people who speak French. When the tourists come, they can get a little tour. You can do a little video, show them the history, recreate what was happening in the 1790s. And let somebody own a little change. Do something and stop boasting, empty boasting. Do something with what is going on in the country, Mr. President. What about the broken health system? It is no secret. Mr. President, my aunt, whose funeral I go to tomorrow, she came down from Carriacou complaining about some pains in her stomach. they said that they saw what looked to them like some kind of intestinal blockage. Okay. The doctor said, well, we did an X-ray. We're not sure what is there. But in order to know exactly what is there and how to proceed, we need to do a CT scan. The problem is that there are 2 CT scans on the island. 2 CT scans on the island in 2 private institutions, none of them working. None of them working. If you go to some hospitals in the to some doctors' offices in the United States and Canada, in a private doctor's hospital, they have CT scans in there. So while the doctor is dealing with you, they're doing the scan right there and giving you the results. Imagine a country with 110,000 people does not have a CT scan working at a given moment. Thank you. And of course, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And, you know, Mr. President, this lady had to lay on the bed just waiting to find out, well, when is the machine going to work? When will the machine be working? When do I get to do this test? In the meantime, she can't drink any water. Or they said, if anything, some clear liquids, maybe a little water. She can't drink even an ensure. She can't eat any food. She's just there for days. We can't blame the nurses and the doctors for that. These are not problems that when you challenge or confronted, you're turning on the nurses and blaming the nurses and criticizing the nurses and condemning the nurses. They are working under very extreme circumstances. And it is the responsibility of the government to at least set up some kind of diagnostic facility. Have a CT scan or MRI, one even, in the hospital. So if the 2 private ones are not working, at least one of the other ones working. How can you say, Mr. President, that your single most important concern is fiscal discipline when this situation exists? It cannot be right. It cannot be right, Mr. President. Mr. President, the shortage of doctors and nurses.
Yes, I just want to have a clarification as to the time. The member started at 10:58. So I think we... I think the clerk and so on may have made a mistake. The member started at 10:58. So 11:58 should be 1 hour.
Me that the members started at 10:58, 10:55. You are saying 10:58. That's a 3-minute difference. I'm not in a position to resolve this. I have to be guided by my clerk, as I don't actually keep the time for very obvious reasons. In any event, it's a 3-minute difference. I don't know that that makes...
It's more than that, Mr. President. The bell just rang and said he has 30 minutes more. And it's now, if it's 30 minutes more, it's 12:15.
Mr. Clerk. According to the clerk. And then at 12:40, he has the 15 minutes, and then there's a time from 12:25 to 12:40. That's according to the clerk's record.
Mr. President, If he started at, I have it as 10:58, clock say 10:55, that's no problem, variance 3 minutes. Therefore, he should finish by 12:38 or 12:40.
Well, according to the
thereabouts.
clerk,
So-
his time he finishes at 12:40.
Okay, so if he's
excuse me,
saying
what?
that, if 12:40, I agree with that. If it's 12:40, I agree with that.
Oh, Senator Garvey, I think we've sorted this out, really. It's not, you know,
Mr. President,
I wouldn't make heavy weather about it, but as I said, I have to rely on my clerk, you know.
and may I respectfully...
And he says 12:40. You'll get the interrupted time back, which clerk, I put.
Thank you, sir.
You get 3 minutes because of the interruption.
Thank you, sir.
You may
And,
continue.
Yes, thank you, sir. May I respectfully suggest that, you know, it is only proper that you rely on the clock, Mr. President. I can change the time on my watch.
Senator Burke, I'm doing my job.
Thank you very much. But I still have to thank you.
If you observe that I'm failing in my job, you point it out to me, but I'm
No,
doing
but
my job.
Mr. President, that should not...
The clerk, I have to rely on the clerk. That's
But
the
I
order
have
of business.
And when you do,
The day I lose confidence in the clerk, then certain measures would have to be taken. I haven't lost confidence in the clerk.
That's right. And when you do, I have
So
to thank you,
don't,
Mr.
you're
President.
using up the 3 minutes, you know. So
Thank you very much.
Could we get going?
Even if
Good.
it takes a minute to say thank you, I'll do that, Mr. President.
Okay,
It's sufficiently important. Yeah, Mr. President, my concern here is that the priorities that have been spoken to in the budget simply do not address the fundamental concerns and fundamental challenges that have been identified when we spoke about the state of Grenada's economy and society on the wake of the structural adjustment program. And so, Mr. President, we cannot embrace this approach. I want to say again that I have no trouble with these objectives. I believe that they are laudable, but they cannot be the top 5 priorities facing our country today. Mr. President, a quick word on the capital budget allocation and the major projects. In a well-managed economy, led by visionary leaders, the capital projects that are identified and selected for development and the resources that are apportioned to them must not be driven by cheap and selfish consideration of vote-getting techniques. Instead, Mr. President, these choices reflect the conscious decision to implement a vision and a plan for the long-term socio-economic development of a country. For us in Grenada, such a vision must entail building an economy that is more diversified, more resilient to external shocks, capable of generating new and higher income opportunities for all of our people, not some, Mr. President. Building such an economy will require the government to identify the key sectors of the economy which have the potential for sustained growth, conceive of the game-changing projects in each of these sectors, and committing in conjunction and cooperation with the private sector the resources that are required to do so. We can't just look and say, well, SGU happened to be accounting for 22% of the GDP. We have to ask ourselves the question, is it likely to be 22 next year? And if it's not likely to be 22 next year because of trends that we're observing, what corrective measures or alternative measures do we put in place to ensure that the shortfall can be cushioned? These are the important steps that are required, Mr. President. Building an economy requires that. And our concern here is that despite the many years of government by the new National Party administration, they have still not been able to address these questions in a fundamental way because they have never put in place a plan for the development of the country. They have largely been driven by short-term, selfish political considerations in the development of and seeing things through political lenses in the development or in the attempts to allocate resources. Mr. President, we can see it in agriculture. I heard much of what was said. We can see it in tourism. Agriculture and tourism combined could barely muster $50 million in a budget of $1.1 billion. Yes? In one case, 2% of the 2.2%, I believe, of the budget, and another 2.7% of the budget. These kinds of allocations for these sectors, these critical productive sectors, will not put our nation back to work, will not put our people back to work. And we keep making the point, Mr. President, no nation can tax its way to prosperity. No nation can beg its way to prosperity. We must produce our way to prosperity. Our people want to get back to work, and we must put them back to work, Mr. President. I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on these allocations, but I want to say, Mr. President, if you look at the police budget, for example, it's twice. The police budget is more than agriculture and tourism combined. I'm not saying that the police services are not important. They need it. They need new headquarters. They need better conditions to live and to sleep in. They need better facilities. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm just saying, Mr. President, it drives home in a very dramatic way how distorted is the allocations that the government has made. Mr. President, it is noteworthy that our debt allocation of the budget, debt remains the number one expenditure. Over $401 million will go towards the debt repayment this year, and that works out to 36% of the entire expenditure. 36 cents of every dollar will still go to pay debts. Before this restructuring, 39 cents of every dollar went to pay debts. So really, our situation is still very precarious, still very delicate. And if the country is going to spend $27 million in agriculture and $401 million on debt, then something is wrong. And this problem was not created by the NDC. We must be honest about this. This problem was not created by the NDC. This is a problem that was created dating back to 1995. And we must say so with honesty, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just want to say this. There are many, when we level these criticisms, when we identify these gaps, when we speak to some of the deficiencies in the allocations, there are many who simply answer by saying, well, all you're telling us what is wrong, what you're going to do about it. Yeah? In other words, they are not even prepared to hold the government accountable for what they're doing. They are not even prepared to ask the difficult and the tough questions of the government. To say that what you're doing here is not right, cannot benefit the country in the long run. They are not prepared. They do not demonstrate the will and the courage to take issue with what is going on here. Instead, they look for a way out by trying to say to the NDC, well, what are you going to do? First of all, we're not in government. We are not in government. So we can't do what the government is doing. And we cannot assume the role of the government. That's why elections are held, to determine which political organization the people want to represent them. If the people decide that they want the NDC to represent them, we can only say with confidence that we are ready to do so. We have taken the time out, Mr. President, to put together a policy agenda for the country. For the first time in the history of our country, outside of the context of the manifesto of the New Jewel movement, for the first time in the history of our country, a political party has presented its vision for the country in a document that, Mr. President, sets up a clear policy framework, lays out our party's vision, lays out our party's mission, lays out our party's core values, and addresses a clear framework within which each of 26 different areas of public policy will be tackled, will be handled. We say, Mr. President, this framework, this policy agenda, which was launched since September of 2016, so it's not been brought on the table because an election is called. It was the result of 2 years of consultations with the trade unions, the business community, the bus drivers, the nurses, all of the different sectors of society. We spoke with them. We asked them, what kind of society do you want to see? What kind of nation are you trying to build? What are your hopes and expectations for you and your children? And based on those consultations, 2 years of those, we came up with a policy framework for the period 2017 to 2030 that we believe must guide our country. 26 different areas of public policy: education, tourism, health, energy, the environment, the treatment of women and children. All of these issues are picked up here. And we believe, Mr. President, that the framework that is presented here is sufficiently comprehensive that it can be used and should be used by any political party that forms the government. We believe they are sufficiently natural, sufficiently neutral in their composition, because they do not speak to political parties. They speak to measures that must be taken to put Grenada on a sustainable path of development. And if any government, whether the NDC or the NNP, decides to embark upon it, we'll be delighted, because we believe, Mr. President, that this would be in the long-term interest of our country. This is not a manifesto. It does not contain promises about laptops and tablets. It says in agriculture, these are the policy guidelines. It sets up policy goals. It sets up policy objectives. It tells you what we want to achieve in agriculture and tourism. And we're encouraging everybody to read it, including the members on the other side. If you disagree with us, let's discuss it. But I believe, Mr. President, that it is possible, thank you, it is possible for our country to agree.
15 minutes more. So the additional 15 minutes starts now.
Thank you. Starts now. Thank you, sir. It is possible for the political parties in our country to agree on what needs to be done in Grenada. It is possible for us to agree on what Grenada needs. We may disagree on how to achieve it, but I believe it is possible to agree on what Grenada needs. And we must be prepared to engage at that level and debate on that level. And the fact that I'm disagreeing with you and why I'm saying why I disagree with you should not become a source of hatred or anger or bitterness. It is because I believe, Mr. President, there is a better way to make this happen. We are now in the process, as the election comes, Mr. President, we are now in the process of putting together our manifesto, which is the third in a series of publications that we will do. That manifesto will not just speak about the objectives and the goals, but the specific, measurable targets that will be embarked upon, the attainable goals that will be embarked upon over the next 5 years. Over the next 5 years. And Mr. President, we would be happy to share those with the public once that opportunity presents itself. We can see, Mr. President, the development of a responsible and prudent approach to economic management. We can see the implementation of policies to promote and encourage the investments in what we consider to be the 5 critical sectors of the economy: agriculture and agribusiness, education, health and wellness services, tourism and hospitality, energy development, and information communication technology. We see great opportunities for our young people in the cultural industries and entertainment industries and sports. We believe that this is an area that must be pursued, Mr. President, for our people. We believe that job creation must be at the center of what we do. And should we form the government, Mr. President, we make no bones about it. Our first 4 priorities would be first, more jobs for our people so that they can support themselves and their families. Second, less taxes on the backs of the people so that they can have greater disposable incomes and be able to realize a better standard of living. Thirdly, Mr. President, better health care for our people. We believe that a healthy nation is a wealthy nation, that not enough is being done to address the health needs of the country at this particular point in time, and that government must be prepared to invest in health in a serious way. And the fourth issue, Mr. President, fourth and final issue, has to do with empowering our people, empowering them and creating opportunities for them. Part of that empowerment, Mr. President, must start with guaranteeing their safety and security. No person should be walking around in Grenada, male or female, feeling insecure, that they cannot walk, that they're leaving work in a hotel 11 o'clock at night, and while going home they're going to be attacked, sexually attacked and raped and beaten by people. No person, male or female, must live in that constant fear. Our young children must not be attacked the way that they are presently being attacked, and we believe, Mr. President, that empowerment of our people must start with guaranteeing their personal security, and the state has a responsibility to do so. So resources must be put, Mr. President, to ensuring that the necessary laws, dangerous offender legislation is passed to ensure that our people are dealt with and safeguarded and protected. There must be tough love. We love our people, but we must be tough on those who are extremely errant and are not prepared to respect the code of practice in our society. There must be also, Mr. President, an important provision to be made for consultations with the public. Consultations with the public. The responsibility of the government to consult with the people. We would like to see the restoration of the parish councils in Grenada. We intend to do so should we form the government. We would like to know that once a month, the members of parliament and the ministers of government will be required to go to their communities and make a presentation to the public and answer their questions. And not approach them with arrogance, but listen to their concerns and be able to take those back to the cabinet and to the decision-making body and to the parliament if necessary to ensure, Mr. President, that people have a say. For too long, the politicians have been running things as if the country belongs to them. We must give the power back to our people and ensure, Mr. President, that they have a final say in what is going on. So, Mr. President, there's much more that I can say. We can speak in some detail on where we want to take the country with health, with education, with tourism, and so on. I'm not going to spend much more time doing that today. I will not offer any comments on the allocations in respect of the capital program. I believe, Mr. President, that those speak for themselves, and what I've said already says enough on that. I just want to say, Mr. President, again, that I agree with Senator Steele that the role of the government is to encourage and to create conditions that are conducive for the development of private sector activity. And this hostile, aggressive stance that the government has taken in respect of some of the private sector entities is not in the best interest of our country. So we urge the government to show some restraint and act more responsibly. It is hurting the business environment, and at the end of the day, Grenadians will all pay for it. So thank you very much, Mr. President. For reasons that I've outlined, I could not give my support to this budget. I do not believe that it adequately addresses the needs of the Grenadian people at this time, and I would not support this budget in its present formulation. Thank you very much, sir.